Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Bruce Belzowski. I'm the Managing Director of the Automotive Futures Group here in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I'm welcoming everyone in person and online to our 17th Annual Inside China Automotive Conference. Well, when we talk about 17 annual, that means we've been doing this for a long time. We've been studying the Chinese automotive industry starting in 2005 when we started our first conference, and our first research project, looking at inside China and what they thought the Chinese were going to be doing in the current and future. And we've been following the Chinese ever since then. You'll see some slides from some of our speakers today, looking at some of the history of China from the automotive side that shows how things started back. And then here you're looking at probably the late 1980s, early 1990s. And then we have the advent of globalization in the late 90s and the growth of the Chinese auto industry in the 2000s. It's been a fascinating story to watch because it's just because of the sheer size of the Chinese market. We're talking about and something the analysts were talking about at maybe probably around 2017, something like that. They were predicting that China would have a vehicle sales volume of about 29 million vehicles, and that's just about where we are now. And it's been in the high 20s, over 25 million for a few years now. There's been some dips. It hasn't been steady growth, but it's been very high growth, and that's one of the things we want to talk about today. Definitely, you're going to see some of our speakers talk about all the different issues related to China today. Let's see here. So some of the major topics that we're going to be talking about include the growth and potential for the Chinese auto industry domestically and globally, interaction of the Chinese government and Chinese auto companies, strategies for foreign automakers in China, and the role of NEVs, new energy vehicles in China, among other things. We've got some speakers going to be talking about many of these things. Talk briefly about the Automotive Futures Group here. Our funding comes from our affiliate program, our supporting members, our research partners, our research on globalization, powertrains, and information technology, and our 5 annual conferences, of which this is one of them. This is a list of our Automotive Futures affiliate members. We always like to thank them for their participation in our program. We couldn't do our research and our conferences without them. So a big shout out to our affiliate members. Some of the benefits that the affiliates get have to do with early results from research projects, free attendance for all of the members of their companies, wherever they are in the world, in person or online here at the U of M. We deliver state of the industry presentations to companies. We take questions from our sample for our sample of manufacturers, suppliers, government, academics, NGOs, and consultants for our research projects. We ask for questions from our affiliate members for that. And new for 2024, there's a 20% discount on U of M executive education programs at the Ross School of Business. This is something that just came out for this year. And this is one of the new programs, the Sustainable Leadership Program. One of our speakers earlier this year spoke about this program, and that it started in September, but it's going again in March. So when you look at our research partners, we've got IT organizations, OEMs, government, NGOs, as well as the supply base and consulting companies. When you look at our 2024 research conference and topics, we focused on our propulsion strategies for the 21st century project, and that focused on the future of charging. Our EV Evolutions project is our online project that shows things that are going on in China, US, and the EU related to EVs. And we call it plural evolutions because we see different parts of the EV industry evolving at different speeds. Our Future of Automotive IT program that is primarily based on our conferences that this year looked at the second time we've looked at AI in the automotive industry. And early this year, we looked at two supply chain conferences. One look at sustainable, profitable supply chains and globalization at a crossroads for nearshoring and reshoring. And we're probably going to be talking more about this in the near future. And finally, our Inside China conference that we're doing right now as part of our globalization story. We've already set up our conferences for next year. We're going to be in February. We'll be looking at software-defined vehicles. In April, we're looking at the effects of the new administration in the U.S. on the automotive industry. We figure by April we'll find out a lot more about where the administration is heading and how the industry is going to respond to that. In July, our 17th annual propulsion strategies for 21st century. We don't have a topic yet for this. We're going to wait to see how things play out with the new administration and how the manufacturers are going to, what are the main topics that we really want to focus on in July. But in September, we're going to do cybersecurity in the automotive industry as a follow-on to our Future of Automotive IT conferences. And in November next year, we'll be again doing the Inside China conference. Oops, we didn't want to do that. Let's try that again. There we go. When you look at our group, it's made up of our researchers, both Kara Elkhire is a senior research associate who's online right now on the YouTube video. She's taking your questions and she's showing and interacting with people who are online. Sherry Netler-Eisenbeiser is here working the conference in person. And these are our student researchers. A few of them turn over. Some of them stay with us for their whole 4 years as undergraduates. But some of them turn over every year, but we've got them working on a variety of our different research projects. We encourage everyone to join our LinkedIn page. We've got about 3,000 followers now and connections on LinkedIn. We're posting 2 to 3, sometimes 3 to 4 times a week on issues related to the conferences, but also related to the major topics of powertrains, EV evolutions, and IT in the auto industry. As I said, our next conference is our Software-Defined Vehicles Conference, and that's going to be on February 19th of next year. And let's get into what our presenters today. Stephen Dyers, partner and managing director of Alex Partners. Mike Smitka is an emeritus professor, an economics professor from Washington Lee University. Yoon Loa is the managing director of Sophonex. He's also been working with major automotive suppliers on ADAS and autonomous vehicles in China, so he'll be giving us that insight. And Kyle Sullivan, who's the vice president of business advisory services at the U.S. U.S.-China Business Council. He'll be talking about trade issues between the U.S. and China. So Stephen's going to start it off. We'll do a 10-minute Q&A with him. Then Mike, then we'll do a Q&A with him, take a break, come back with Yoon, and then Kyle. Q&As after each one, and we should end around 12:40, adjourning and having lunch, at least in person. For post-conference, all the attendees get a link to all the presentations and the video. The affiliates are getting the link, but also a summary of the review of the highlights from the conference that Kara puts together for anybody who's really wants a good shorthand about what goes on at the conference. Her summaries are great in terms of telling a story. The agenda, the speaker bios, registration list, sponsorship opportunities, affiliate information, upcoming events, that's all on the Inside China Conference website that you all received when I sent you the link to the live stream email. Audience questions and conference feedback. Sherry's passing out cards for people to give questions in person, and online you can put those into the chat, and Kara is going to send those over to us as we go through the conference. And I think that's all I'm going to say for right now. I'm going to bring in our first speaker, Stephen Dyer from AlixPartners.
Thanks, Bruce, for that intro. It's interesting to know how long this conference has been going on. I would say it must have been created with a lot of foresight, because it was created before China really came of age. And so today, I'd like to talk about how China's auto industry and the automakers have already come of age. So it's a pleasure for me to...
Steve, let me give you a quick bio.
Sure. Yeah, thanks.
So Stephen Dyer is co-leader of AlixPartners' Greater China business and head of the firm's Asia Automotive Industrials consulting practice. He has over 30 years of corporate and consulting experience. Steve has worked extensively in the automotive industry, including in digital connected, autonomous, shared, and electric vehicle topics, and with traditional business strategy and operational transformation. Prior to joining AlixPartners, he was Ford Motor Company Asia Pacific Vice President for Business Strategy based in Shanghai. Steve has an MBA from U of M Ross Business School, PhD and MS in Mechanical Engineering from the U of M, and a BS in Mechanical Engineering from Brigham Young University. A U.S. citizen, Steve is fluent in Mandarin Chinese and has lived and worked in China, Greater China, for over 20 years. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you very much, Bruce. It's a real pleasure for me to join. I'm happy for the technology to allow me to join from Shanghai, where I am, and not in Ann Arbor, which is my hometown. I have fond memories of being at the Transportation Research Institute, both because my mother used to work there, but also I remember doing some research back in the day on, I would say, early elements of autonomous driving or advanced driver assist systems. So it's a pleasure for me to participate in this conference. As I mentioned, I'd love to share with you both the history and the current and the future of the Chinese auto industry and how it has really come of age now, and I would say in the last 2 years. So every year, our firm, AlixPartners, does an automotive outlook. And so a lot of the material in this are from that. So if you have interest to get more information about that, please feel free to contact me. So going back in history, there have been cars in China pretty much as long as there have been cars anywhere in the world. So in 1902, the record shows that one of the warlords bought a car and brought it in for the Empress Dowager. And there were cars, even some of the American companies were present in China for many years. But I would say things really didn't pick up for the auto industry in China until reform and opening started in 1979. And so that was one milestone that I want to point out here, is when the joint ventures with foreign automakers started. That's when things really began to pick up in terms of activity. Now, in terms of sales, they really didn't pick up until 20 or 25 years ago. So as we look at the sales on the right, there are a couple things. I chose US and, and India to compare with China's sales volume for two reasons. So we see in 2009 was the first time China sales exceeded those of the US, and China became the largest automotive market in the world. It was a little faster than I expected, but due to the financial crisis, US was down that year, and so China jumped ahead and hasn't looked back since. The other thing that I find very interesting is back at the beginning of the 2000s, China's and India's auto market wasn't that different in terms of sales volume. It was still very, very small. But in the last 25 years, China has now developed the auto industry to become almost 6 times as big as the Indian auto industry. So that says a lot. Now, the last thing that I would point out here that's a very significant milestone is up at the top right. In 2009, the strategy to overtake on the curve, so to speak, was initiated, and that was to double down on the electric vehicle industry as a way to allow Chinese automakers to sort of jump ahead to the new technology of the future, much as the telecom system jumped ahead, surpassed landlines, and went to mobile phones. So we see today, and I'll talk a little bit more, that that strategy by the government has been a resounding success. So we expect now, as sales in China approach 30 million units of vehicles, that they could potentially double by the mid part of this century. And that's looking at the vehicle ownership per capita. We don't expect that to be as high as as the US or other countries, but as the GDP per capita increases, we do expect further growth, as much as double the market size. It won't be as high because most of the cars are in urban centers. You don't need cars as much because there's a lot of public transportation, and some cities have license restrictions. So we've been through several sort of global disruptions in the auto industry. The first was the Japanese going global in the 70s and the early 80s, mainly with lean manufacturing and quality and fuel efficiency. And then the Korean manufacturers in the 90s. And then in the 2010s, Tesla, against all odds, so to speak, became successful with a purely electric product portfolio. Now we're looking at China as the next disruptive force, and I'll talk a little bit more about it. But I think this is China's time to come onto the world stage in a very prominent way. So first, within China's auto market itself, last year was the first year that China brands exceeded half market share, so 50% market share in China alone. Before, they had hovered around 30 to 40% market share. The global brands like Volkswagen, GM, Toyota, Honda, Nissan, etc., had gained a majority of market share. Last year, it exceeded 50%. This year, it's approaching 60% of the market. Now, as you see, a lot of that is due to the China brands really dominated the new energy vehicle sector. So we expect by the end of this decade that Chinese brands will exceed 70% market share within China, their own market. Globally, China last year in 2023 became the leading automotive export country, and that's continued this year. So you can see that the rise over the last 5 years has been quite rapid, and that's across several automakers. The powertrain type is not biased toward any powertrain. It looks about the same as the powertrain portfolio currently in China. So that's a big, fast growth. Now, there obviously in the US, there's 100% tariffs on Chinese EVs, so we don't really see any coming into the US. In Europe, new tariffs were implemented, and that will definitely slow down the export growth However, what we foresee is that existing plans for Chinese automakers to localize production around the world will be and have already started to be accelerated to get around the tariff obstacles. So all of you probably are familiar with the rule of thumb in the auto industry. You make cars where you sell them. And we see that happening long term for the Chinese automakers, just as we saw it happen with Japanese and Korean automakers and so on. So by the end of this decade, we expect Chinese brands to make up about 1/3 of global sales. And obviously, that's helped in China if they hit over 70%, with China being the largest market, that helps the global share. But even in Europe, we expect them to at least double their share by the end of the decade. So that's significant. We don't have big hopes for North America just because of the tariffs, but we'll see how that goes. Southeast Asia, we also expect to be a large growth market for Chinese. Now, for new energy vehicles, this is really part of the success story for the Chinese automakers. This year, for the first time, new energy vehicles, which include battery electric, plug-in hybrid, and range extended electric vehicles, will exceed 50% of sales in China, which is quite astounding, given that the target, I think for 2024 or 2025 for the government of China was about 25%. So exceeded that target a couple of years early, and now it's like blowing that target away. We expect by the end of the decade, about 3/4 of the vehicles sold in China will be new energy vehicles. So we recently did a survey of electric vehicle consumers around the world, and we found that, as we expect, almost all of the China consumers surveyed felt like it was highly likely they would buy a BEV for their next vehicle. Interesting thing, in Europe and North America, the interest has sort of stagnated. So you see that interest hasn't really changed much from 3 years ago, which we see, in the market performance. So why is that? Well, we'll talk a little bit later about that. But it's interesting. Something that was unexpected for me was there still is great interest around the world, even in the US, from consumers to buy a Chinese electric vehicle if the price is right. And price is right in the survey was 20% lower than a similar spec BEV from another brand. So that was consistent across all the countries, except Japan was a little bit of an outlier, less interest in Japan. The other interesting thing is the brand recognition among consumers around the world. So, who would expect in the US that over half the consumers would know about Chinese EV brands when they haven't seen any in person? So BYD clearly is the most recognized brand, and then the old standbys, NIO, Leapmotor, Li Auto, are also quite well recognized around the world. And that is sort of biased toward young people. The younger the people are, the more they tend to know of Chinese brands. I'm not sure why that is, but us old folks, we aren't maybe as up on the latest trends. So one interesting thing that's continuing to drive EV sales in China is there is good public charging infrastructure. In China, unlike the US, most of the EV charging has to take place in public because there aren't the standalone homes. And going back to my years in the corporate world, when we did surveys, we found that consumers who either owned an EV or knew someone that owned an EV became less anxious about range. They were less anxious about finding a charge or how far they could drive or how long it would take. So, with half the people in China buying a BEV this year, or half the car consumers buying a BEV, that range anxiety is much less, and the charging anxiety is much less than it is in the US. So the Chinese companies have been very successful. This year we dove deeply into how they're doing this. So we found that, as we expected, Chinese OEMs are able to bring products to market twice as fast or in half the time as traditional OEMs. They have a 30 to 35% cost advantage. That's not even including, a 50% or 60% investment advantage for each new program. And they're very focused on delivering what younger or new consumers want, and that's essentially intelligent technology and styling, and less interested in the traditional mechanical specs of NVH, ride and handling, durability, and so on. So keep those things in mind because that will play a big role in how they're able to do all these things. So we found when we looked at the time on market, the freshness of vehicles, for non-Chinese brands in China, it was about 5 years on average in market for each model. China legacy brands were about 2 years fresher, but astoundingly, the EV dedicated brands like BYD, Ito, NIO, and so on, they have an average 1.6 years on the market, extremely fresh. So Chinese consumers, if a car's been on the market 3 years, it's already old. It's already not interesting. So this makes it very difficult for traditional automakers with their typically long product development cycles. So what we found was indeed true, what we heard, that Chinese EV startups are developing complete new vehicles in 20 months compared with about 40 months for traditional OEM. So how are they able to do that? We tried to dig into it. And I would say, if I was to summarize um, two elements. One is just rigorously focus on what the customers want and downgrade or deprioritize everything that is not a differentiator for them. So what that means is essentially intelligent technology and styling gets most of the focus, and the traditional attributes of durability, ride and handling, NVH, crash even, get less priority. And so what that enables is you can do less testing. So durability testing is about 5 times fewer miles for Chinese EV makers than traditional OEMs. They often will do just one cycle of summer winter testing instead of two. And sometimes they do them simultaneously in the northern and southern hemispheres. Fewer crash tests. And then software we'll talk a little bit more about, but they use about 20 times more over-the-air updates for their software in the first year after vehicle launch. So these are how they're able to save time and expense. Now, the part about focusing rigorously on what customers want or what differentiates them, means that they can also save product cost or cost of goods sold by not over-speccing or over-engineering parts of the vehicle that can be just good enough. So this to me was quite interesting. And it frankly, it is a more risky approach, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But that's sort of the mindset of a usurper or a new entrant. They don't have a brand to protect. They don't have as much to lose, and in fact, they have to take risks to gain anything. So that's the challenge of competing with such a player. So the other interesting thing is they definitely overspend on software. So because software and intelligent software is their differentiator, they have a much bigger team than the traditional OEM. So about 10 times as many software dedicated people. The other thing that you may have heard of, and we verified this through about 10 or 15 interviews with different automaker engineering teams, is they work a lot of overtime, 40 to 100 hours per month of overtime for the NEV startups in China. The traditional automakers in China are kind of similar. They work a lot of overtime. That's compared with 0 to 20 hours of overtime a month for traditional automakers, for the engineering product development team. So they're working more hours. So in terms of over-the-air updates, the mindset of a lot of these Chinese automakers is a software mindset. It's similar to, the software world where we know there will be bugs. We know that all the features won't be available in the first issue, but let's launch it first, get it on the market, and then we'll learn and we'll fix bugs and we'll add features through over-the-air updates. I have a friend who drives a Chinese EV. He was using the advanced driver assist system and it encountered an obstacle on an entrance ramp to a freeway that was kind of a strange situation and it didn't respond well to it. So he sent a chat message to the owners group in which some of the OEM representatives observed. And within a week, the scenario that he had encountered, there was an over-the-air update that fixed the vehicle's response to that scenario. So that's the mindset of a software-focused organization. Now, the other thing is cost. So why aren't EVs selling in Europe and North America? Well, part of it is there just aren't that many inexpensive value for money vehicles available. So if you look at China, comparable internal combustion engine vehicle like the Haval H6 SUV is about the same selling price as the BYD UN Plus EV. You don't see that in Europe and North America. There's a substantial price increase when you jump up to an EV equivalent version. So that's one of the drivers of EV sales in China and one of the obstacles in other markets. So how can Chinese EV players sell at such a lower price? Well, based on a teardown of several products by our friends at A2 Mac 1, Chinese EVs can have up to a 35% cost advantage over traditional EVs, traditional OEM EVs. And that's substantial. That's substantial enough that, for example, the BYD Seal, if they were to export to EU and be subject to the new tariffs, they could still sell at a comparable price to one of the EU brands and be profitable. So that's a tremendous strategic advantage. So how can they obtain that cost advantage? I'd say two reasons. One is, again, just rigorous focus on what differentiates them in the market, which is intelligent software, and de-emphasizing sort of the mechanical attributes that are not a differentiator and can be just good enough. And so they won't over-engineer some of those attributes. The other thing for some, especially for BYD, is a high amount of vertical integration. So for BYD, obviously, batteries are the big element of vertical integration, and more than obviously the Tesla and the VW. Tesla, you can see, sources a lot from low-cost countries, from China, whereas Volkswagen does not. And then the other thing with BYD vertical integration is they have essentially their own subsidiaries that do components. And so this gives them insights into the competitive marketplace. It allows them to learn and negotiate hard against their own suppliers. So that level of vertical integration helps them commercially to obtain low cost. So that drives the availability of relatively value for money vehicles. So we talked about what especially Chinese consumers value, and essentially they're much more interested in some of these technologies. So in-car digital experience, much more important to Chinese consumers than elsewhere. Preference for an EV, much higher. And they're also interested in alternative ownership models, which means like subscriptions or battery swapping owner models or things like that. So much more sort of open-minded about technology and newness, because frankly, this is the first and in some cases the second generation of car buying in China. So they don't have that legacy that mature market buyers have. So as a result, you can see here's evidence that the China brands really over deliver on ADAS, for example. At equivalent price ranges, you'd expect the higher the price vehicle, the more ADAS content would be in it. But even at the lower price ranges, from 11 to 17,000 US dollars, that more than half of the Chinese vehicles have significant ADAS technology content. So this is part of their, focusing on the intelligent software as a differentiator, especially compared with non-Chinese brands. Uh, as a result, there are a lot of Chinese ADAS players that are winning in the China market for various reasons. Obviously, cost and time to market or responsiveness. They're willing to open their software and hardware to gray box or white box transparency to their OEM customers. And a lot of OEMs in China, just like OEMs in the US and Europe, are worried about geopolitics, so they tend to source locally. So that's their advantage. But these Chinese ADAS players are also going outside of China, and so they're setting up both manufacturing and partnerships outside of China pretty extensively. I'd say more focused on Europe than the US, especially in the future if there's a US software ban on Chinese software. That'll definitely affect and sort of separate the two markets. So a last element of sort of innovation is direct to consumer. So different retail formats. So a lot of the EV startups in China, just like Tesla did in the US, are creating new retail formats, including their own cell phone direct to consumer stores and online sales. And so when we look around the world, I would say direct to consumer retail is still a low percentage, but China is really at the forefront of direct to consumer. Maybe it's because there are so many EVs sold in China that are new brands. But that also is an interesting trend that's being led in China. And that also, ironically, in the UK, more mature market. Now, that's all the good news. Um, Now there is some mediating potentially bad news, and that is only two of these EV companies in China are profitable. So these are the six that are publicly listed for which we have financials disclosed, and only BYD and Li Auto are profitable. Now, do others have a path to profitability? Maybe. Um, But it's tough. It's tough. You're selling, I mean, there's been a price war in China, so that's one of the reasons the Chinese automakers want to go to Europe, for example, because they can realize much higher prices. But we know that batteries are expensive, so until the battery costs come down, it'll be very difficult to make an economic return. So what does that mean? That means that based on our analysis, we think of the 137 EV brands that have sold at least one vehicle in China in 2023, probably only 19 of them will be financially viable by the end of the decade. Now, this analysis is based on sort of using Tesla and Li Auto's break-even volumes of what was it, 400,000 units for Tesla for them to break even, and 200,000 units of Li Auto selling PHEVs to break even. So this is based on that assumption in the industry structure. So what does that mean? Does that mean that there will only be 19 brands left in 2030? No, probably not. There will probably be more, but it means that the owners of those brands will need to have deep pockets to support them financially to either get them through or sell them. We expect some consolidation or some platform sharing in various forms. So that's kind of the bad news. Now, who the winners will be, I won't venture a guess there. I mean, there are a few that I would probably bet on. You could probably think about who those might be. But we'll see. We'll see how it works out. Now, the other question, so just to summarize, there are a couple of other questions that we have to wait and see about, and that is, will consumers outside of China value the same things that China consumers value and devalue the things that just need to be good enough? So that remains to be seen because there haven't been, large amounts of EVs sold outside of China. But my guess is the younger consumers will still be interested in this intelligent software technology and maybe less worried about Is there some noise, wind noise, or does it feel total as stable as certain other legacy automakers when you drive it at high speeds? The other question will be, to what extent will China's EV makers' cost advantage go away as they localize production around the world? And I don't know what the answer to that is. Their cost advantage will go away inherently because of labor and materials and um, equipment costs. It'll also go away because of tariffs, but to what extent it will go away, that'll be something to watch. But suffice it to say that the Chinese automakers have already won in China. I don't think there's going back, and they've done it through using fresh, intelligent, technology-packed vehicles. It remains to be seen how many will survive. But the rest of the world now can expect to see an impact from these Chinese automakers, from exports, localized productions, and technology. So now is the time, I think, for traditional automakers to consider what type of mindset do they need to have to compete with these disruptive companies that have a much bigger appetite for risk because they have nothing to lose and everything to gain by taking risks. Even though some will drop out, some will succeed. So I think it really does require sort of a clean sheet and approach to product development. And instead of asking, why should we change from our traditional ways of doing things that we've developed over the last 100 years, we should ask, why shouldn't we change? And let's try it and see what happens. And then adopting a software mentality. So launch it and fix it later with over-the-air updates is going to be critical as the software portion of vehicle value continues to increase. So thanks for listening. I'd be happy to open for any questions that the audience may have.
Thanks very much, Steve. Oh, you really touched a lot of bases here, Steve. A lot of bases. I'm going to start out with the election. What are you hearing in China over the past week since the U.S. election? Can you describe what this incoming administration means to the U.S. auto industry in China?
Well, one thing that has been interesting is before the election, all of our clients who are planning overseas expansion were saying, we just have to wait until the election to see which direction it's going to head. And now that the election happened, I think they're all still scratching their heads a little bit and saying, we're not sure we understand which direction it's going to head. But I think a few dimensions are worth keeping your finger on the pulse of. And one dimension is the tariffs that might happen, might change in the US. 100% tariff. Some people ask me, well, will they double the tariffs? And I say, it doesn't matter. 100% tariffs are pretty much keeping all the products out. So 200% tariffs aren't going to, you can't get less than zero in terms of imports. But could they potentially be decreased? Maybe. The other dimension is localized production in the US. So up to now, the Chinese clients that I have felt like a lot of obstacle for them even setting up production in the US just because of politics. So if that eases up under the Trump administration, I think that would be a significant thing. And I think the Chinese companies would appreciate that and want to take advantage of that, just like they would in Europe, whether it's suppliers or OEMs, and component suppliers or battery suppliers. The other dimension to keep an eye on is what happens between Mexico and US. So right now, I often say that Mexico is the soft underbelly of the USMCA, the US Mexico Canada agreement, because they don't have as high tariffs on Chinese goods coming to Mexico, and then they can go straight into the US. Now, the way around that is, and this is the fourth dimension to look at, is the proposed ban on Chinese, I would say, intelligent software in the vehicles, for national security reasons. And this is a a very targeted approach to close the soft the loophole through Mexico into North America, and that could be significant in its impact. So I think those are the four dimensions that I'll keep an eye on, you know, and I won't venture a guess as to which will change. I don't expect tariffs to change much, but my guess is there might be some change related to localized production, but we'll see.
Very good. Thank you. Um, Now BYD already is building in the US, right? They build buses in California. Does that give them some opportunity within California at least to start building vehicles? I mean, cars and light duty vehicles.
Well, one thing that it does give them is just familiarity with operating in the US, which is really important for any relatively young automaker going abroad is just getting your feet on the ground and understanding the local situation because that's been a challenge for Chinese automakers over the last couple of decades as they've tried to go abroad. So it does give them an advantage in terms of just better understanding the local environment. I think, you know, they and others have had plans over the years for various local production in the US, and they've stopped and started and stopped. So I won't comment on their most recent plans related to that.
Okay. Now, Steve, we keep hearing about a slowdown in the Chinese economy. Yet vehicle sales, usually a predictor of the economy, seem to still be on track for over 25 million vehicles. Uh, what's going on there?
Yeah, the Chinese economy does seem to be slowing down, but you know, slow for China is like 4-5% growth, which is tremendous for you know the U.S. So it's not surprising that even with a small growth, there's some growth in vehicle sales. There have also been some government incentives like cash equivalent of cash for clunkers
Mhm.
in China that have helped things a little bit. Um, and still some, you know, purchase tax rebates, which make electric vehicles less expensive. Um, so it is slowing down. The growth is slowing down, and we'll see, I think, in the coming year how the auto market is affected. You know, the pandemic did have a negative impact on the auto market, but then it rebounded. So, you know, when I first came to China in 2005, the average growth of the auto sales was, you know, double digits in China. And I do not expect us to really ever see that again in China. I think it'll be single digits or even negative. Um, and so I think we've sort of reached that more steady, small growth track.
Yeah, it's interesting because of course, we've been tracking what's been going on in China for a while, as you have, right? And they now have I probably more vehicles on the road than we have in the U.S. in the fleet. I know the fleet reached the U.S. Equivalents 1 or 2 years ago, I think. And do you see that just growing and growing and growing? I mean, can the roads and the uh, transportation system handle a 400,000 vehicle fleet, 400 million vehicle fleet?
Uh, so my answer is, first of all, yes, I think there still is growth potential for the fleet. Um, and then secondly, I don't think the fleet per capita in China will ever come close to what it is in the US, you know. Um, and that's because of the urbanization in China and great public transportation. The intercity high-speed rail makes road trips less necessary in China than they would be in the US. So I expect, you know, China has about what, 3 or 4 times the population of the US.
Right.
So the fleet the park in China will be higher than the US, but it won't be per capita, it won't be as high,
Okay.
is my expectation.
Yeah, very good. Um, the foreign auto companies in China, they've really taken a hit, right? They're much the we're talking about significant differences. And you didn't talk about it in your presentation, but of course this is a top of mind for all the foreign auto companies in China. Some have already left and then come back with joint ventures or some other relationships. I think it was it Stellantis that decided to just import into China. Um,
Yeah.
the uh, in the next, say, 3 to 5 years, so what do you think they need to do to survive in the future? I mean, you're looking at the uh, the number of factories that Volkswagen has, for example, has in China is huge, huge number of factories, and that probably are idle at the moment. Some of them are probably idle at the moment. True for General Motors as well. Um, how do you see them surviving in the future?
Yeah. It's the million-dollar question, and it's a really challenging situation for them. Um, Frankly, I think their time has come and gone. I don't expect them to, make up over half the market again in China. I don't expect all of them to leave. I expect them to continue to have some presence. I think to win, they really have to learn um, from the Chinese EV makers how to develop differentiated tech-heavy vehicles quickly and inexpensively. And so to do that, um, and that'll be a skill or a capability that will allow them to compete in the rest of the world with the Chinese OEMs when they eventually begin penetrating those other markets. And so it's not just in China. Now, they need to defend their home beachheads. So it's imperative, I think, for them to learn, and they can do that through a variety of means. One is, achieve low cost or fast through platform sharing. They can have strategic partnerships where they develop vehicles together. They can acquire. Stellantis has invested in Leap Motors, and they're adding that to their global brand portfolio. That's one way to approach it. Renault has set up their own product development team in China for the Twingo low-cost EV, and so they're trying to learn from the Chinese. Interestingly, GM seems to be collaborating with Hyundai in Korea. Um, so there are many alternatives, but I think the fundamental uh, sort of requirement is that they do things a different way so that they can develop vehicles faster with more software, intelligent software technology, and be be willing to make the tough trade-offs in the design to save cost on the things that really aren't going to be their differentiators going forward.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge, isn't it? And it's something that probably could affect their whole global product development strategy, right? And of course, I'll do a promo for our conference in February, looking at the software-defined vehicle. And in that conference, we want to talk to manufacturers, suppliers to see how far along they are in this development. And then, in terms of the U.S. Manufacturers in particular, they're the ones that have the most to lose if they don't make this adjustment. And timing, cost, all that stuff is all part of the story, right?
Indeed.
Uh, the the charging story is interesting. And you mentioned that in China, that it's so different compared to the U.S. We did our conference last July looking at the future of EV charging. We found that 80% people who have EVs in the US are charging at home. Not the case in China.
Mhm.
And as you said, it's such an urban that things are so urban in China that parking is always a challenge and charging is always a challenge, and you have to do public charging. Um, uh, as you said, there's a lot of experimentation, but the government has been supporting charging tremendously. I mean, some of my most recent data that I saw is like 10 million chargers in China. I don't know if that's public-private kind of combinations, but something like that. And one of those things is battery swapping. Um,
Mhm.
One of our online people are asking, could battery swapping have a chance outside of China in Europe, US and Europe?
Sure, sure. NIO in China is the leading user of battery swapping. They have swapping stations set up around most major cities and have an app that you can use to schedule it. A lot of drivers drive up to it and see if it's open, and then use the app to schedule, then drive in, and you can swap your battery in 3 minutes. So far, it's worked quite well, but it's expensive for Neo. So I'm not sure the economics are working out, but technically it works, and it's great for the consumer. Um, so I think the key question about battery swapping is the economics. If you own all those batteries, is that, what are the financial returns on that asset? Um,
Mhm.
but technically and from a consumer standpoint, it seems to be working quite well.
It's very interesting because we track about the auto companies have gone off and tried to do things outside of automotive, and they haven't been very successful. We've seen this happen over many decades of following the industry. Uh, Charging could be one of those things where we've got now we see some companies coming together to create their own charging stations. Yeah, here in the U.S., kind of like the Tesla supercharger story, but then having companies come together. But in terms of battery swapping, we've had a hard time getting our arms around this, just because of it's almost like having a gas station that only fills up GM vehicles, because the battery swapping is tends to be Neo. And
Yeah.
Neo has a brand and how many batteries do they have? And as they grow and have many different models, do they change the battery? And then what battery do you want in your vehicle? And the idea of having battery swapping stations for all manufacturers, no matter what battery they're using, sounds pretty difficult, right? It's like having, yeah, I have fuel. I have a gas station that only has fuel that goes into GM vehicles versus Ford vehicles, and it sounds very confusing. Um,
Yeah.
how have you guys been approaching this?
Yeah. Both, having independently owned charging stations as well as battery swapping stations are both really tough investments. So financially speaking, the key driver for those investments to pay off is really the running fleet that you have that will factor into utilization of either the charging stations or the battery swapping. And commonality among the batteries, as you pointed out, is also a critical driver of financial success for that. So far, as you saw from my slide, NEO is not profitable, uh, far from it. So that tells you something. Um, but a lot of their expense is marketing expense, as well as R&D. But public charging stations in the US are kind of on a razor edge in terms of profitability, just because the running fleet of EVs that would utilize them is not high enough yet. So as that gets higher, then that investment might look better. But right now it's pretty fraught.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I agree with you. It's, it looks like it's going to be a real challenge to be able to pull that off. An individual company, especially if you're, especially, all the different automakers are going to want to do their own thing in terms of batteries. Our battery is cooler than your battery. And somewhere along the way, just as they do with engines, right? Our engines are cooler than your engines for all these reasons, right? And uh,
Yeah,
will
and they
that,
have to be packaged differently in each
yeah,
vehicle
yeah,
to use
yeah.
the space.
Can you see that being a real differentiator in the future, or will consumers just say, you know, 0 to 60 in this amount of time is gonna do it for me, or will the manufacturers try to manipulate the battery in such a way that it starts differentiating them from their competitors?
Well, just like gasoline engines used to be a differentiator among brands, I think right now battery life, battery energy density, range, um, charging time, especially charging time is maybe a new frontier in differentiation. So yes, I do think that will be a differentiator for the next maybe decade
Yeah,
and maybe beyond.
yeah.
Um, now gasoline engines are not a differentiator for companies, and so everybody's been able to achieve something that's pretty good.
Hmm.
There will come a time when batteries are like that too, but maybe then there will be successive leapfrog battery technologies that will allow
Right, right.
companies to differentiate, I
Yeah, we're
expect.
not done with battery evolution. I think we're still early stages of that, I think. Want to talk a little bit about your vertical integration story with BYD. Now we know that the U.S., Japanese, European companies were strongly involved in vertical integration, but in the late '80s and '90s, all that went away. Um, and there were reasons for that, right? A lot of it had to do with how many people you had on your books and how many people you were paying for in terms of healthcare and pensions. That was one of the big reasons, and the development of the supplier industry was such that they could handle outsourcing, right? Um, what do you see? How do you see the BYD story evolving?
Well, historically, in emerging markets, you tend to see more vertical integration. I mean, going back 120 years ago, or whenever the Ford River Rouge plant was created, you'd have the iron ore coming in one end and the
Right.
vehicles going out the other.
Yeah.
That was an emerging economy for automotive, and Ford had to control every aspect of that to be able to build a quality and inexpensive product. So in China, that has been a trend across many industries. BYD, so the choice is vertical integration for maybe two main reasons. One is you really think that you can do things better if you control it all. You have design synergies, you can make trade-offs better than you could if you outsourced all the components. Um, so you might be able to be confident in your capability to do low-cost components or batteries. The second is it does give you a little leg up in terms of sourcing the stuff that you might source from the outside because you have visibility and transparency into the cost structure. You can compare your supplier's cost with yours and either learn from them or point out where they need to sharpen their pencil. And that's a real commercial advantage in negotiating and working with suppliers. So those are a couple reasons for vertical integration. Now, you get to the point where for certain things, especially asset heavy stuff, some companies just don't want to be involved in that segment, and so they might outsource that or and we'll see that evolve. I also expect companies in China to slowly get away from vertical integration, especially as they go global.
Okay. Very good. when you recently, I think the JD Power NEV analysis of consumers of NEVs in China showed that there's some quality issues, right? That quality was not up to that. It was that was a problem. That they were not having more problems than in the past. You talked about the fixes with the software fixes, and um, do you see that there's potential down the road for this China speed story to actually come back to bite them?
Yeah, I think that's one of the remaining questions is will that come back to bite them? Or will they, they've progressed. The Chinese automakers have been through, 20, 15 to 20 years of product development cycles. So they can do 3 to 5 products in that time. And I used to study innovation a lot, and companies can usually get good at something if they do it 3 to 5 times. And so
Mm,
now we're seeing the result of that. The Chinese automakers have developed vehicles at least 3 to 5 cycles, and they've gotten better at it. So they'll continue to get better at it. So the question is, will the consumer response be negative faster, or will they learn and sort of catch up and improve
yeah,
quality and reliability? So
yeah,
that'll be interesting to watch,
yeah. And will it
especially
have
as they're exposed to new consumer sets in Europe, for example.
an effect on their buying habits? Will the story get out? Well, don't go to this brand; their quality is weak, compared to other brands. Uh,
Yeah,
that become a differentiator in the buying process, right?
yeah.
Um, one of our attendees says, ask a question. I have heard that some key components of EVs, such as BMS, inverter, converter, and even e-motors, are almost commodities. Uh, do you confirm this view? And if not, what's the situation for these key components?
Yeah, e-motors, I think, are becoming commoditized. As much as some of those manufacturers would like to talk about their differentiation, there's not much. We see, 15 to 20 e-motor suppliers in China that are very competitive. And so there doesn't seem to be a lot of differentiation at this point, unless you get to the margin and you say, oh, I want, a few percentage points of efficiency improvement. Um, Battery management system, stuff like that. Less so. I mean, that's a little more software heavy and electronics heavy, so you can play around with that. But in terms of e-motors, I would say it's definitely getting commoditized.
Yeah, I think one of the other things that we've been looking at are e-axles. Uh,
Mhm.
do you see that as being commoditized as well?
Uh, Not yet, not yet. That there's still a lot of expertise required because mechanical grinding and reliability and noise issues.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of learning to happen yet. One interesting question is, do you get all in one, 3-in-1
Hmm.
e-axle motor inverters, or
Yeah.
do you have separate? So obviously, from a weight and a cost standpoint, theoretically, from a design standpoint, the 3-in-1 is better. But we
Mhm.
see many OEMs going to buying them separately for commercial reasons. That they can
Mhm.
negotiate with each supplier, and they're not at the they have a little more leverage over each individual supplier. So that's interesting that the commercial benefits outweigh the design cost benefits. So
Yeah.
that'll be an interesting uh, trend to watch.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, uh, last question for you. Uh, when you look at the Chinese auto industry now, what do you think it'll look like in, say, 5 years? Well,
In
you
five
already
years, I think,
showed us some graphs, what 70 some percent and by or was it
yeah,
very high numbers of NEVs by 2030, right?
yeah, I think we'll see high penetration of NEVs. We'll see high market share from Chinese brands in China. We'll see a lot of really advanced driver assist systems and intelligent cockpit technology that will be leading the world, I think.
Okay.
And we'll see really focused sort of activities by the foreign automakers in China. They'll have streamlined and focused on a niche that they feel they can win in. And I think we'll have some more collaborations besides Stellantis and Leapmotor and Volkswagen and XPeng. I expect to see more collaborations in the EV space from some of the leading global automakers.
Yeah, so a little if there may be a rebound here for the global automakers, possibly.
Not too big of a rebound in China, but perhaps big enough to protect their home markets a little better.
Yes. Yeah, very good. All right. Thank you very much, Steve. We appreciate it if you could stick around and do a Q&A after Mike's presentation. I know it's late. It's late in China, but we appreciate you taking the time. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thanks, Bruce.
Okay. Let's go to our next speaker, Mike Smitka. He began following China over 50 years ago, when he also gained his first exposure to the auto industry working at Chrysler plants in Detroit. He has a BA in East Asian Studies from Harvard and a PhD in economics from Yale, and is emeritus professor of economics at Washington and Lee University, where he taught a course on the Chinese economy for 30 years. The author of 2 books on the auto industry for the past 30 years, he has also served as a judge in the Automotive News PACE Awards, which recognize supplier innovation. He's fluent in Japanese and reads Chinese and German. Welcome, Michael.
So today I'm going to focus on data that put on my pure economist hat. But yesterday I was visiting a supplier as part of the PACE Awards process. And their first launch, or one of their first customers, maybe half of their initial customers were Chinese companies. And that's something I've been seeing consistently over the past several years, that more and more the global tier ones view China as not just a central market, but as the market that's most receptive to new technologies. Some of it is just the sheer number of players. Yeah, and I will probably touch on the Chinese economy and political economy a little bit, but I'm going to try to avoid that to get through in the time constraint that Bruce has. So again, data is going to be my focus. I have gradually built up a database of model level monthly sales for passenger vehicles in China starting January 2020. I've not seen any real point in pushing it backwards, although I have data sources that would let me do it. It would be very tedious and I don't see value added. But the database has a lot of the drivetrain, vehicle segment, and so on, which, okay. Lets me get into a number of interesting, or at least to me, interesting questions. I also have geographic data. How many of which model are sold monthly in something like 300 some Chinese cities? So China has over 200 cities with 1 million plus population. So not only is the population now primarily urban, but it's primarily large urban areas. But the vehicle sales are concentrated in a couple dozen of the richest and biggest of those cities. Okay, so I'll get into the data in a moment. Obvious open questions. Will strong sales continue? What are profits? And overall, my outlook is pessimistic. I see current sales levels being driven by incentives. And when incentives come off, as we all know from the US and elsewhere, there is payback. There are too many players, and so the industry is structurally unprofitable, and the distribution system is broken. Direct to consumers is a very small slice of the Chinese market. So most of the players in the market use dealerships, but dealerships for a variety of reasons are going belly up. And then there are longer and shorter run economic and demographic headwinds. Let's see. Is there a way to get rid of the...
Or do we just move it up?
Okay. Okay. So this is production over time. And you can see that if we go back 15 years, the market was very small, and production in 2023 is so far was over 30 million units, of which the majority were light passenger vehicles. So the growth of the Chinese market is really very recent. That means that while there are 440 million cars, that was June data for the park in China, most of those are relatively young vehicles, and that feeds into the dealership story. So, okay. Oh, the side arrow key. No, no. Space bar, no. Tapping screen, there. Okay. So here are data from the last 5 years. So I have the data updated through last month. Just finished my last double check last night. A couple of vehicles that show up in one database, one source and not another. And you can see that if we go back to 2020, electric vehicle sales were really quite minimal. So not only is the overall Chinese market very new, a lot of first-time purchasers still in the vehicle market, but within that, electrified vehicles are even more recent. So while the government may have been promoting and putting big subsidies out in 2015, of which a lot of them were ended up being paid to fraudulent enterprises. So a Jerpisa presentation, not of mine, but of Tommaso from years back. That's been cleaned up since. But it's really in the last year, 2 years that the electric vehicles have taken off. Okay, this is focusing just on battery electric vehicles versus plug-in hybrids. And you can see that within this larger electrified vehicle segment, plug-in hybrids are recent, more recent than battery electric vehicles. And they are not yet half of all vehicle sales, but the Chinese consumers are opting for guaranteed range. Some of that came from widespread video coverage of Chinese New Year trips home, where they never arrived because snowstorms and so on resulted in lower range than anticipated. The charging stations on these routes into the countryside were less numerous than in the cities. And so you now see the latest vehicles being advertised with 800 miles of range on one tank of fuel, plus the battery component. So that's a trend that is showing up in several different ways. Okay, again, to emphasize the newness of the market, if we go back to the second quarter of 2020, first quarter was COVID, if you remember. So those data are totally out of kilter. And BYD was selling all of 20,000 vehicles, 30,000 vehicles in a quarter. Okay, they now have individual models selling more than that in a month. And if we look down the list, BYD was already the number one company in the electrified segment, although Tesla overtook them later. But Toyota and VW and the Guangzhou Automotive Ion brand, and I've always been saying NIO instead of NIO, and they were already present in the market. So now in last quarter, 24 firms sold over 10,000 vehicles in the electrified vehicle market. We are still seeing new entry. Xiaomi, which is a cell phone company, Huawei, which does also produce cell phones, but is in a wide array of things. So basically, we see two of the leading cell phone, the two leading cell phone companies in China are now in electrified vehicles. We don't have an Apple car yet, and it looks like we never will. Plus, there are other new tech giants. Baidu, which is the Google equivalent, is very much present in the auto industry. Okay, before getting to the joint venture story and the rise of new producers, one feature of the Chinese industry is that portions of it are controlled by either the national government. So first Automotive Works dates back to a 1956 Soviet project, one of 156 heavy industry projects that the Soviet Union funded. And that was the start of the Hongqi brand that our previous speaker mentioned in passing. But you can see that these companies have gone nowhere. So FAW is owned by the central government. Dongfeng is the old second Automotive Works, also owned by the second central government. Chang'an is sort of a more complicated story. Guangzhou Automotive is the Guangzhou government. SAIC is the Shanghai government. BAIC is the Beijing government. And none of these have done well. Part of it is because they all have joint ventures, and particularly for the first five, BAIC is basically not done well no matter what way you cut it. They have done so well profit-wise from their joint venture partners that they had no need to really bother selling their own cars, except that their ownership expected it. Okay. So what's happened? If we go back to 2020, second quarter, the joint venture share was basically 75% of the market. And the dominant two firms in China then were Volkswagen and GM, followed by Toyota. That share has dropped down to something like 37% so far this quarter, which means October. Most, but not all of that is attributable to one firm, BYD. So China had hundreds of automotive firms going back to the 1980s when every city had their own truck manufacturer. Out of those, couple hundred firms, you'd think that there might be one firm with superior management, pluck, luck, and skill. And BYD was one of those. They were a cell phone battery manufacturer. They had excess capacity, so they began making buses. One of the other big players, Geely, did briefly motorcycles and decided that passenger vehicles would be a much better way to go. So again, looking specifically at the global OEMs and how their share has changed. So Japan had 30% of the market at peak. They're down to 16%. The German three had 27%. They're down to 13%. The Detroit three, which meant basically General Motors, was 13%. They're now down to 6%. So, and the Koreans are essentially not part of the game at the moment. Okay. In contrast, these are the purely private firms. So BYD green at the bottom, the various small startups, Xpeng, Nio, Weilai, Series, Aito, Ozone, Leap. Ozone is the Neta brand. So they collectively are second. Then Chery, which is run as a private company, although there is a government ownership component. Tesla, which is purely private, but Musk is, shall we say, very politically involved. Li, which is the one of the two that is profitable. And I would include Geely as a third electric vehicle maker that is profitable. And then, so you can see that the private owned sector has been what's done well in China. The state owned linked sector has done very poorly. And the global OEMs have stuck with ICE models, slow model change, slow turnover, slow introduction of new technologies. And when the market goes from close to 0 to 50% electrified vehicles in the space of 5 years, the incumbents are just not on that product development cycle. So they are not yet in the game, but they are launching things vigorously. Okay, I won't bother going through that. China is only partly SUVs. So that's quite distinctive from the United States. And in the SUV segment, the A segment, which would be compact SUVs, so the size below the Tesla Model Y is a B segment vehicle. So it's really the A segment, which is the biggest of those. Okay, jumping around a bit. In the market, I don't have great data, but exports are now approaching, next year certainly will be 1.5 million units. Imports have shrunk from a large slice of the market to fairly minimal levels. The biggest importer in China is Toyota Lexus, followed by Mercedes, BMW, and then I think Porsche is next in that lot. And Audi is in there. So the German luxury brands, the imports are almost all on the luxury end of things. Okay, so very rapid growth in the market. So what does it look like if we dive into more granular data? So if we look at the number of new model launches in 2022, and this is not including updates, new trim levels, that sort of thing. These are just new models, including relaunches of existing model names, but with a new vehicle. So in 2022, there were 131 ICE models launched. So a bit over half of the total number of launches. So far this year, there have only been 35 new ICE vehicles launched in China. Some of them aren't actually on sale yet, but these are coming from the government filings prior to sales. So a couple of the latest ones in that number aren't yet in my sales database. EVs are 68, so almost twice the number of ICEs. And PHEVs, plug-in hybrid vehicles, have gone from half of the number of EVs to basically 1-to-1 in terms of new model launches. So Chinese car companies are looking at what consumers want, which is range and less worries about plugging in and having access to chargers and all of that. And they've responded by shifting their portfolio mix fairly rapidly. Total number of models. So this is something that comes back to the competitiveness or the level of competition in the market. So in 2020, and this is annual data, so at any given point in time, there weren't quite that many models for sale because there were models launched during the course of the year and models that disappeared from the lineup during the course of the calendar year. But it's a quick summary. So in 2020, there were 481 identifiable models, not including imports. And there are a lot of import models. If you go to European data as well, there are a lot of imports that are selling 10 and 20 per year or per month. So the model count is much higher. It looks very similar between China and Europe. So 480 models in 2020, 750 models so far this year. And out of the total, the number of ICE models available hasn't changed all that much. What's really happened is not the disappearance of ICE models. So the legacy car production hasn't disappeared yet anyway. But what's happened is the growth of new models. And again, in 2020, PHEVs there was only one model for every 3 battery electric vehicles. Now it's closer to one for every 2. And if we look at 2025, it will be much closer to parity. 15 models selling at $250,000 a year, which is the rule of thumb for what an assembly plant capacity would be. If you're not selling that many out of a given factory, you may well not be making money at the plant level, which makes it hard to make money at the corporate level. And if you look at the list, you can see that Tesla last quarter was the top seller by a few hundred units, and BYD held places 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9, and is that 13. So BYD again has gone from not being a player to having huge economies of scale, which is one of the 2 reasons I see for them being quite competitive. And these are concentrated in a family, 4 or 5 families of vehicles. And so these aren't all independent models. They're models being made off of the same platform. And so there's a lot of cost advantages there. Furthermore, BYD is on its 3rd BEV platform. So they have been able to iterate at the platform level, which again gives them cost advantages. The Ford F-150 Lightning is not yet a pure EV platform. They modified their existing platform. And so there's a lot of catch-up to be done. The other thing with BYD is batteries. So CATL and BYD are number 1 and number 2 globally in battery production. BYD has much more experience making batteries than they do making vehicles. What I've seen of their other parts of vertical integration from my supplier visits, where the candidates for awards are expected to benchmark against their competitors, is that on some of the components that BYD makes in-house, they are neither technically nor cost-wise competitive with what's available in the outside market. So there may be a bit of corporate ego involved in that. Price war. If there's this sheer number of models available, okay, then what happens to prices? So from my spreadsheet, sorry, it's I don't try to translate things when I do it. So the BYD Seal at launch was priced between 190,000 yuan and 280,000 yuan. And then the latest discount in the bottom right is showing up as 14.5 or 145,000 yuan at the bottom end. And suggestions that you can get bigger discounts. That's not including 0% financing, which BYD is offering for a number of their vehicles. So it's a drop in price of $5,700 to $6,400, depending on the trim level. Some of this is because battery pack costs have fallen 50% or more. And BYD is able to capture all of that internally. If you look at their financial statements, they're making money on batteries and they're making money on vehicles. So how they set up their internal transfer prices, I have no idea. But they are able to see that if they have a new battery tech, guess who's the first adopter of that? BYD themselves. So Tesla depends on CATL for their latest batteries in China. So they're just one of many customers, though they are CATL's single biggest customer. So a price war going on. And if you look at the economics of price wars, when there's cost uncertainty, you don't know whether your rival is taking losses to maintain volume or whether they have reduced costs and therefore are reducing prices. It's surely a mixture because the discounting is so widespread. And then add on top of that the standard challenge in the auto industry that as models age, they tend to drop in price about 9% per annum in the US, where there are a couple econometric studies. Okay, so why am I pessimistic? One is it's really hard to make money in the auto industry in China. There are too many models, too many firms, lots of uncertainty that makes price discipline impossible. But also the economy is doing very poorly, and I see that getting worse rather than better. From a longer run perspective, the working age population in China peaked in 2013. And the number of young people is down by 25%. So future automotive purchasers are going to be less and less common. Of course, that leads into future demographics as well, because there are 25% fewer potential mothers. So we know that looking out to 2050, the Chinese population will continue aging very rapidly and falling in aggregate population quite rapidly. Most of the cities with a population over 1 million are shrinking right now. But it's the urban areas that are the car market. So this is a challenge that if you look at Japan in particular, you can see how car sales domestically have fallen over time. Economic growth faces lots of headwinds. Growth was driven by urbanization, building housing, building retail space, building roads, and then coming out of the financial crisis, building a national highway system, a national high-speed rail system, a national network of airports, I think common to public works. Many of those airports don't really have any flights in and out of them. But a couple $1 billion here, a couple $1 billion there generated a lot of employment. So growth was not driven by manufacturing. And manufacturing employment has been falling for some time. Manufacturing employment as a share of the population, the workforce in the US, has been falling steadily since the end of World War II. So it was down from 30% down to something like 8% today. China is on that same process. The auto industry is not exempt. Productivity is improving, or it will in particular if we see some exits. And so the auto industry won't be driving the economy, though it's not clear that Xi Jinping is able to do that arithmetic. And he has a very narrow coterie of advisors, as is common with dictators. So he may not be be well informed. Overall, the emphasis of the government is made in China 2025, which is high tech. Now, high tech just doesn't generate that many jobs, even if it does generate a lot of billionaires. Okay. Policy response, well, China is not socialist. They have no national retirement system, nothing equivalent to the US Social Security system. They have nothing equivalent to the US Medicare system, which for those of you who have lived in Europe or Canada, the US does not really have a system. It has a patchwork that doesn't integrate. So China is really monopoly capitalism, with the central government increasingly politically dominating everything. A weak fiscal system, so there's just a huge bailout. The policy announcements that have taken place in the last 6 months are all aimed to avert financial crisis. They paper over or ignore other problems, including job employment creation. Okay, aggregate data. I think I have one more slide after this or two. This is 12-month rolling, cumulative sales. So if we go back to 2015, the market was at 17.5 million entering the year and peaked in late 2017, early 2018. The very seasonal sales in China dropped way off before COVID, recovered, dropped off again, and is now at a historic peak. But in the short run, and here's the seasonality, which makes analyzing trends very challenging, because 2 months does not tell you as much when things bounce around like this. And this is already 3-month rolling sales data that detrends some of the month-to-month variation. Okay, but you can see that right now we are in the historic, entering the peak sales for the year, November, December, January, depending on when Chinese New Year falls, is the peak for vehicle sales. So we'll see what happens. Incentives are strong, so national cash for clunkers, but there is also a wide array of local and provincial incentives of the same 20,000 yuan. But it's not clear that these local incentives actually have strings attached. So the national incentive, at least on paper, cars are supposed to be turned in, sent to recycling, et cetera. But the little bit that I've been able to find seems to suggest that the local level is just straight cash. So, but they add up to quite a bit, $5,700. Those are all set to roll off January 1st. They may be continued, but pulling that much in the way of incentives out of the market will clearly, it pulls sales forward. People already talking in the media about buying a car now because they fear if they wait, they'll lose the incentive. So it pulls sales ahead. And so we'll see when they roll off a big downturn. And that happened in China. If you look at January 23, when EV incentives, which had already been cut by over 50%, but they were finally eliminated. And you can see a very sharp drop in sales, the then historic peak in December. And despite the trend growth, no recovery until August. Okay, distribution. With the joint ventures, the global OEMs losing a huge amount of share, that's the death knell for a lot of car dealerships. SOEs don't have traction. They have been, in many cases, subsidizing sales for a long while. Dealerships are structured differently. There are not that many, despite the large number of cars on the road, they aren't old. All of my vehicles range between 12 and 20 years old that I drive personally. That doesn't happen in China. So service income, dealerships don't have that as a fallback. Used car sales are less than half of new car sales, but they're dominated by small, used car parking lots that had been reserved for retired military. So, and F&I income is small. The price war amplifies their problems. And so the two biggest dealership groups in China have gone belly up. One of them just closed altogether. This would be like AutoNation and Sonic, the two largest dealerships in the US, but two of the largest dealerships, just closing their doors overnight. Okay. Evolution of EV share, just played around with trying to see if there's a trend there. sort of iffy data manipulation, but it looks like the PHEV growth is really fairly strong, and EVs are at low single digits. So what happens to losers? Lots of exits already. So the ones that I counted quickly this morning, including Suzuki and Mitsubishi Motors and the French. So PSA has a little bit left. Renault may have 2 vehicles left. Fiat may have 1 vehicle left, but basically they've exited the market. And Ford is doing very poorly. Jeep is gone. Okay, but we're still seeing new entry. So Xiaomi, Baidu, Huawei, and Oppo, which is the number 2 cell phone maker, is involved but not directly making vehicles. We have new EV brands. These are all just the last year, in the last 12 months. But others remain weak, as you've heard a couple times. Something I am not going to try to present, but I have some regional sales data. A number of the car companies remain strictly regional, so I see more exits to come. I'm used to a 55-minute academic time slot, so I can talk on endlessly, as Bruce knows.
Thank you very much, Mike. Let's bring our other speakers online as well. We've got Kyle Sullivan joining us. Hey, Kyle.
Hey, good morning, Bruce. How are you?
You didn't hear the presentation probably, so I don't know how much you can join in here, but feel free to jump in if you have some input that you feel you want to contribute. All right, questions, Michael. When you look at and this is true for you others as well. When you look at the potential closure of the internal combustion plants particularly of General Motors and VW, because of such a reduced share in their volumes, and these tend to be the government-based brands. How do you see that affecting how that labor is going to be affecting the government response? Michael, I'll start with you.
So the Communist Party, of course, is the party of workers who have no voice. So there are, but there have been strikes in car plants in China. There are a couple books looking at specific examples. But the government is concerned about urban employment, and the auto industry is urban. Farmers, they don't matter politically. If they riot, who cares? Urban unrest is a whole different story. So urban plant closures are potential flashpoints. But the auto industry, most employment is its suppliers. That's true in North America, it's true in Europe, it's true in China. That's one of the reasons that there's so much entry, is because Chinese companies have learned to work with global tier ones. They don't have to develop their own componentry. They can borrow the engineering. Tier ones are happy to do more engineering rather than less, because that's where they make their money. So that's the tier ones have some restructuring to do in what they supply, but the real pain is just a handful of these factories and the dealerships, which are widely scattered, so don't matter politically. The current head in China, Xi Jinping, is not like Jiang Zemin, who actually worked in a car company at one point and was the mayor of Shanghai and a patron of the auto industry. So the auto industry is not politically connected the way that it had been in the past, which is probably fortunate. As far as I know, the head of Geely lies very low. He has not gotten in trouble the way that some of the internet CEO billionaires have faced. And Li Auto is also fairly quiet. So I think it really won't matter. There will be some noise, but the numbers are relatively small, doesn't affect suppliers. And in some cases, the car companies, the new growth companies are located where the failing companies are. So that helps offset at the local sort of larger employment story.
Steve or Kyle want to jump in on this one?
Yeah, sure. In general, in the spectrum of sort of labor support, it's frankly easier to close a manufacturing plant in China than it is in Korea or Germany. Maybe not as easy as in the United States. So, there are precedents for doing that, but on the other hand, local governments definitely want to maintain employment and economic activity for tax base. And so that's why, even though most of the EV players are not financially viable and may never be financially viable, they won't uh, go out of business or be consolidated as quickly as they might be in another country, just because the local government will tend to dip into their deep pockets and try and sustain them for local economy. So that will extend some of the factories' lives. The other hope, I think, on the part of the government is that I think what Michael alluded to, and that is that the up and coming car companies will take over those assets and be able to maintain employment as their sales go up. So, but it's clear that, for these foreign brands, the overcapacity is now significant. One OEM I know used to have 5 plants. They probably need 1 plant going forward. They've sold 1 and they're transferring another, but they still have 2 extra plants. So this will be an ongoing challenge for the traditional automakers over the next 5 years.
Kyle, do you have anything else you want to add on this?
Yeah, I could add that, at this point, the overall economy is not very good, and the sentiment is low. So it doesn't make the auto industry stand out so much. And the bigger problems comes with the global JVs, especially VW has been closing several plants in Jiading, in Shanghai for the last few years because they are losing market share so significantly. And closing plants probably is a very economic decision for them to make. And given there might be a lower scale protest from some of the workers who lost their jobs, but really there's no power from the unions. There is a union, but the union in China really never play a role in these kind of things. Therefore, maybe there are even bigger political or financial issues that these things won't be the ones that government will stand up to really do something significantly different. What the government is doing is putting incentives. For example, the recent cash for clunk, it has helped the sales from October. The previous 3 months has been negative year over year. So the government stepping again, and we see the numbers going up, but it's unsure how sustainable this could be.
Very good. Kyle, did you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I was just going to add from a micro perspective, local governments will endeavor to contain the spread or contain the reaction to plant closures for companies that are considering conducting furloughs, they'll need the support of the local PSB. They'll also there are other tactics that companies can take, such as making announcements on in third, like offsite, not at the plant. So companies have this reminds me going back to 2008, 2009 time period during the great financial crisis when there were significant furloughs at China-based production facilities. And so there is a playbook for companies to follow, but just some basic tips.
Okay, very good. Now, when you look at the slowdown from the joint ventures situation, and we'll start with Mike on this one, and he's already talked about this about reasons for what happened. I think Steve also talked about it in terms of the slower product development process of the foreign manufacturers that were kind of caught off guard by the quickness of how of the Chinese manufacturers that were moving so much faster than they were. Considering the situation of globally about how the foreign manufacturers work, what could they have done differently? And still, what can they do differently to build things up again? I'll start with Mike.
Yeah, so I've chatted with Bruce a little bit about, why did the global OEMs lose out? And some of it, I think, is that even 12 months ago, if you looked at the costs of batteries and battery packs, it wasn't clear that spending a lot of effort on developing battery electric vehicles was going to pay off financially. In the EU, you had the emissions mandates that were requiring companies to make EVs, but as it's turning out, consumers aren't so interested in buying them. So from the perspective of Volkswagen, sort of really hesitant to go all in on developing electric vehicles because the battery pack costs were so high. Well, that isn't true today. And so the companies that, for one reason or another, including hoping to strike it rich on the stock market, even if they failed as a company, the owners could do very well for themselves. Placing these bets, the Musk effect, the companies that did that are in a better strategic position than the global OEMs. And I think the company that will be really interesting to watch going forward, everyone's watching BYD, but is what will happen at Geely, which owns Volvo, which owns Polestar, which owns Zeekr. All three are publicly traded, although Volvo mostly, very few shares are actually available on the market. Watching what happens with them will be very interesting.
Thanks, Mike. Steve, what's your feeling about this?
So if I remember your question, it was why were the traditional automakers taken off or caught off guard with the achievements of the Chinese automakers, and how did they do it? What could they have done differently? So I think the first thing to recognize is that in 2009, when the Chinese government had this plan to overtake on the curve, so to speak, and support the electric vehicle development, that was significant. That was meaningful. And in China, when the government puts their voice behind something, people trust that. And so it gave a lot of new entrants confidence that there would be an opportunity. And so a lot of new entrants poured in, and just through the process of having a lot of fighters in the game, some of them will succeed, most will not, but some will. So that helped. Ironically, what helped drive the EV market in China was Tesla. And there were a lot of Chinese EV players, but they weren't selling that many. But when Tesla, especially after they localized production in Shanghai, and started selling vehicles that were exciting. You know, there was this mystique about Musk and the cool factor for Tesla. Ironically, it was a foreign automaker that came in and like excited everyone about EVs, and that excitement spread to these other Chinese brands, and then from that point, the Chinese brands, as I mentioned, really focused on differentiating through intelligent software, intelligent cockpits, advanced driver assist systems, and just making things good enough and all the other traditional mechanical attributes. And um, so I think the traditional automakers historically were not very good at software. They didn't have the software mentality of taking risks and fixing it later. And I think that was one of the things that allowed the Chinese automakers to get out ahead.
Yoon, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, very briefly, because right after I'm going to talk a little bit more on this. I think it's also twofold. First of all, it's not just in China. I think this applies to the whole automotive industry globally. The industry is being disrupted by a number of things. And on top of that, because of the decoupling, the geopolitical situations, the extreme overcapacity in China, that just made the Chinese market so much more competitive. And the companies do whatever they do to stay alive. That makes them, especially the last few years of the COVID, right, in combination of a high inflation globally, almost non-inflation in China, and the technology development almost spent 2 or 3 full generation just over the period of time, make them right now so far ahead of the rest of the world.
Kyle, did you have anything you wanted to join?
Yeah, just briefly. So the question is why were foreign OEMs slow to adopt electrification? I think part of it's just implicit in the nature of global companies. Speed to market is a challenge for many MNCs in China across industries, and global companies, historically they've had to follow global standards for pricing, right, for product specifications, technical requirements, and those standards typically come from headquarters. And making changes to those standards to fit the local market, oftentimes requires global approval. And because of that, foreign OEMs inherently are at a disadvantage, I think, vis-a-vis their domestic competitors, because domestic competitors don't have overseas headquarters, or headquarters are in China, and all their decision making is in China, and that's why they're much more nimble and faster to respond to changes in customer needs and requirements.
Very
Over.
good. Yeah, those good points. We're running a little later than usual, but the discussion is so good. I just I don't want to cut it off, but we'll continue it after our next speaker. Let's do 10 minutes. Let's do 10 minutes for a break so people can stretch their legs here, and then the people online, and then we'll come back with Yoon and Kyle. Thank you very much. Michael, thank you as well. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Our next speaker, Yoon Luo, is the managing director of the Sofon X LLC, and prior to this, he was a senior executive of Continental and Hella in China. Yoon is an innovative leader with 20 plus years of global experience in the auto industry, specializing in AI, autonomous driving, and mobility solutions. With a proven track record in P&L management, product innovation, and business development, Yoon's expertise spans ADAS, AD, and AV, and safety electronics, and cutting-edge automotive technologies. Yoon has an MBA from the U of M Ross School, focusing on strategy and general management, and MS from the University of Michigan as well, as and a BS in EE from Tsinghua University. Welcome, Yoon.
All right. Okay. Thanks, Bruce. And good late morning, everyone. This is Yoon. It's really a pleasure to be presenting here at the conference, and also great to be back in Michigan, to Ann Arbor. After my engineering and MBA from Michigan, I started also here at TRW in engineering and then moved to Bosch. My journey also took me to China, where I helped establish a joint venture. And since then, witnessed the firsthand of the incredible pace of change there. So before coming back to US earlier this year, I was the head of business area of autonomous mobility for continental China. Today, I serve as an advisor, helping companies with product planning, market, and business strategies. So the automotive industry has transformed dramatically over the past two decades. When I began, cars were heavily mechanical. And then we focused on electronics and equipped hundreds of ECUs in a car. And now we are shifting to a world where software, data, and AI redefines what a car is and how we interact with it. And tomorrow's generation probably sees a car less as a vehicle, but more as a data hub or even a third living space. Today, I'd like to share my observation on how these changes, particularly from China, as we are at this pivotal moment at the crossroad for our industry. So we are seeing a convergence of forces that are disrupting the norms that made our industry for decades. First, the power structure and the value streams are changing. Traditional OEMs and suppliers are adapting to a new reality where software, battery technologies, and digital services carry more weight than the traditional mechanical components. And they clearly struggle to keep up. This has opened the door for new players and the non-traditional alliances. For example, tech giants like NVIDIA and Qualcomm have dominant roles in some of our most important decisions today. And second, technology breakthroughs in EV, in autonomous drivings, also redefine the vehicles, as well as how we build them and how we service them. As cars become software-defined, the need for constant update and changes add new complexities and also means challenges and opportunities. And finally, we face hyper competition from the auto industry in China, who have seized quickly on advanced technologies and favorable policies. Chinese automakers now drive global innovation with unprecedented speed and push the boundary of cost efficiency. So I'm going to talk a little more on technology and the China aspects today, but not focus on the ecosystem paradigm shift. So on AI, that's also my major. This is a timeline of how AI has intertwined with the advancement of intelligent and autonomous vehicles. There are so many fascinating stories here, and we can easily talk the whole day about it. Since the 1950s, when AI emerged as a field, there has been effort to apply it to our cars already. In the 80s, when neural networks laid the groundwork for today's deep learning and the generative AI, my graduate study and first job at TRW was to apply stereo vision and the neural networks to solve some of the most difficult tasks to improve safety. However, it was a tough sell then to use a black box technology in automotive. And later on, we all saw that Mobileye has been quite successful to push the driver assistance forward by advanced sensing and sophisticated vision algorithms, but that's still considered a traditional CV. Both the AI academics and automotive continue to push the boundaries. We see from 2004 and 2007, the DARPA Grand and Urban Challenges made autonomous vehicle known to a lot of people. Also, at the same time, 2006, Geoffrey Hinton laid out some of the groundwork for modern-day deep learning. So those moments were more important looking back from today. But at that time, it wasn't. Until 2012, when the AlexNet beating everyone else by a big margin at the ImageNext competition, that gave us a little hint what this technology might do. And in the same year, 2012, Google's spin-off Waymo as their self-driving car project also showed quite significant progress using neural nets. And following that, AI really took off. We saw the AlphaGo shock the world. The ChatGPT now brought to a closure for a Turing test. And AlphaFold, their success in medical research won a Nobel Prize. So we also have seen Tesla and Waymo building vehicles capable of understanding very complex driving scenarios from urban navigation autopilot to robotaxis. So it is the AI revolution from earlier neural nets to today's multimodal generative AI that enables a autonomous vehicle to progress steadily. And finally, we could see the fully autonomy soon. And ChatGPT clearly showed us the use of generative AI. But this could soon transform the automotive industry in many different areas. Earlier this year, I worked on a project for fun, applying large language model and image models in fashion industry, and including one of the automotive clients. The focus was to just find future trends in color, materials, styling, by connecting the global fashion insights with the past automotive design success. So AI already played a major role in storyboarding, selecting successful images, and even generating new pictures, the visuals for concepts. While the AI generated content, at least for our project, hasn't been used for final product design, but clearly this shows all the potential to influence the real design. Generative AI can analyze a massive amount of data and pull real-time trends and the consumer preferences online in real time, and giving clients a really big competitive advantage to create content, to plan new products. And in China, we see now the smart cockpits, the AI are also using language models. It allows the user interface to be personalized and adapted on the fly to fit driver's preference through inputs like voice or gesture. China has adopted these features widely. You can see them even in many of the mid-range vehicles. And generative AI is also transforming corporate operations and DevOps. You can automating from requirement management to coding to testing, especially for coding. The productivity increase has been impressive. The companies actively pursuing it often see improvement by 50% to 5-fold. And the future programming could be as simple as giving wishes in natural language. And then for autonomous driving, AI really help the decision making with some common sense. It allows the car to make very complex decisions more naturally. And we'll come back to that later too. Here comes to China. This is a newly emerged Chinese term. So I think 10 years ago, we didn't really have this. You might have heard it by now. It's 卷, meaning involution or to roll up to get moving. In automotive, it reflects the fierce competition among the automakers as they fight to stay ahead in an extremely saturated and competitive market. In order to survive, the companies are forced to innovate, to lower the price, to keep up with consumer demands. And make no mistake, this is a negative word, even in the Chinese context. The companies are willing to do everything to stay ahead. Even that means lose money to increase market share, or to rip off its suppliers to keep some margin, or to vertically integrate at the cost of the whole supply chain. But it's the result of overcapacity. With more than 50 million annual capacity installed in China now, but with a market less than 30 million. And the government is part of the reason behind it. And at this point, it's not doing anything major to curb it yet. So consequently, the competitive atmosphere has propelled China to the front of the global automotive landscape. That's what we are facing today. So it's important to understand the involution, the Juan, as the driver behind this turbulence, because it shaped today's automotive industry in China today. So here are some of the results. It has been mentioned by two of the previous speakers, similar trends. First, the Chinese domestic demand has been weak. Actually, since 2017, it's peaked there. I mentioned the Chinese sentiment. I think the Chinese people can feel it. So the overall declining trend, and then 2024, after the 3-year COVID, 4 years COVID, it should have rebounded, but actually it turned out to be even weaker. We have all 3 months in Q3 of a negative number year over year compared to the previous year. And overall, the first 3 quarters of 2024, the sales has dropped by more than 500,000 units already. But however, the domestic brands are really, really strong. And only in the matter of last 4 years, since 2020, it reversed the trend. So the domestic brand went from 36% of the share to 63%. And we are seeing 70% really within reach, as the global JVs at this moment is losing the momentum, and there is no signs to reverse the trend. And the NEV market enjoys steady growth. In September, NEV sold a record 1.3 million units, growing 42% year over year. And all 3 months in Q3, the passenger NEV sold more than 50% of the market. So it represents a significant tipping point. For the new energy vehicles, actually, there are the pure EV, there is a plug-in hybrid, and also very uniquely, the EREV, the extended range electrical vehicle. They all enjoyed very healthy growth. And while the ICE melted down 20% drop year over year. And the export continues to be very strong, now accounts nearly 20% of new vehicles built in China. It's forecasted 5.5 to 6 million to be exported this year. It came a long way just of the last 4 years, probably only less than 1 million from 19 or 20. And at this moment, out of those 5 to 6 million export, still majority, 78% are the ICE. And we are seeing the export percentage of NEVs declining. It's probably reflected by the cooling global market for EVs. And even though we are not seeing any meaningful consolidations in China yet, we are seeing the strong become stronger, especially the top 3, BYD, Chery, and Geely. They enjoy from 46% to 20+% growth year over year. And the new brands like Xiaopeng and Li Auto, and even the brand new Xiaomi and Huawei brands, they are also doing stronger and stronger. So you may wonder, in such a growing market, what it takes to survive or even flourish. BYD becomes the #1 Chinese brand just in a matter of a few years. In 2020, it only sold 450,000 vehicles. And last year sold 3 million. And just the last quarter, it sold 1.1 million. So it's unbelievable growth. And Chery is the absolute export king. They exported more than 1 million just for the first 10 months. And Li Auto, consider they only offer EREV, and at a very high price segment, they are selling reliably more than 50,000 a month. And there is this Huawei, not even an official auto brand. Yet it assures whoever it works with will enjoy a popularity among the consumers and some good sales numbers. So what's the formula to be successful in this market? So first, you have to price attractively and provide the best value for the money. Sometimes it means aggressive pricing strategies or even price wars. And the major brands like BYD frequently cut prices to gain more market share. And then you need to invest heavily to have best technology and products to stay ahead. Local brands, the NIO, the Xiaopeng, the BYD, they continue to invest in R&D for all those advanced features like autonomous driving, battery technologies, connectivities. And they spend a lot of money for innovation, for cost-effective solutions also. In order to stay present in the market, there is rapid product development and constant adaptation to market trends, meaning you have to update the model every 12 to 18 months, even introducing new platforms and new brands just to keep some attention in the market. Automakers are doing whatever they can to enhance their user experience, standardize luxury features, and provide personalized services. For example, the NIO House for its fan base and the battery swap services just to build loyalty. Automakers are increasingly vertically integrated. We talked about that briefly earlier, but look at BYD and Tesla, who are the two examples. They vertically integrate and they are very successful. So in order to do all these things to survive and still afford all those things, the government support and policy incentives are no doubt indispensable. Or try overseas for some breathing room. But this is the norm in China automotive today. And in the end, whoever survived will become very formidable competitors. China has made tremendous progress last few years in automotive technologies and products. And these are just the top 10 trends by the Chinese SAE. It encourages the company to push the boundary of technology and innovate at very fast speed. It demonstrated the Chinese automakers' priority in electric and autonomous driving technologies, such as high-speed e-drives, new battery materials, the L3 autonomous driving, the urban NOA. And also showed the market their likeness for intelligent user interface, such as smart cockpit. Domestic substitution for technology autonomy has become a priority. Used to be monopolized by the global tier ones for EHB, active suspension, or the domain controllers, the big SoCs. Now China has been not localized, has been developing themselves. And to improve efficiency in mass quantitative manufacturing was, again, Tesla originally introduced it for this one-shot multi-point body forming technologies. These advancements are not just technical achievements. They represent China's strategic vision for automotive leadership by mastering from the full technology chain, from autonomous driving to electrification to advanced manufacturing. China at this moment is setting the new benchmark for the global players. We already mentioned the Li Auto. It's a good case study and one of the first EV startups to enjoy a healthy profit in this market. While Li's original bet on solely EREV, it's actually proven it has been a smart decision. But when it originally launched it, it was laughed at by all, thinking it's old and inefficient technology. But now it's followed by many. Li and also has been successful in its comfort and utility, such as this popular three treasures, the in-car refrigerator, the big screens, and excessively comfortable seating has been standard in the Li's vehicle. The brand is now making remarkable strides in autonomous driving, which it has been lagging behind. Take a look at its latest realization of this very novel System 1 and System 2 architecture, inspired by the book Think Fast and Slow. It leverages the latest large language model and the vision model to enhance common sense reasoning and the situational understanding. So to zoom in, the System 1 is this end-to-end autonomous driving system. It unified, combined all the perception, the decision makings, the controls within a single framework. It's responsible for this quick, reflexive decision making, such as braking if a car cuts in. So this is basically what Tesla is doing. And then they also have this System 2 handles the deliberative, more complex reasoning, which takes longer to analyze for nuanced driving situations. Transformer, which is the large language model, interpret much more complicated driving situations like going into a roundabout or highly congested streets, where the traditional rule-based driving models simply cannot handle. It also allows sequential planning, such as step-by-step reasoning, using also a common term in AI, the chain of thoughts. For instance, when driving on a snowy road, the model considers slow down steps and also anticipate how the change in road conditions might affect the chassis control. And furthermore, Li is also building this so-called world models using generative technology to create a very powerful and realistic virtual environment for autonomous driving training and testing. Just think about it. In this long run, while the onboard computation is more powerful enough to run this world model in real time, and the system can calculate all the possible upcoming scenarios and make the best decision. This is way beyond the human driver's capability. And Baidu is another key player. As we are getting closer to L4 and L5 fully autonomous for mining and at the port, one of its biggest applications is robotaxi. Waymo has been steadily increasing its operation in San Francisco and Phoenix. But in China, Baidu is making big progress, faster at the bigger scale, and in a much more, very importantly, a tolerable environment. Baidu ventured into self-driving in 2013 under the name of Apollo, also following the Waymo spin-off. It has also developed its large autonomous driving foundation model just lately, leveraging the breakthrough in AI. And also, like Waymo, Baidu has been cooperating with automakers for its autonomous vehicles. In 2021, it released the last generation, the 5th generation robotaxi, jointly with Bike. It's called Apollo Moon. That vehicle has been used for smaller scale robotaxi commercial operation. But it's really this year when Baidu rolled out already the 6th generation. It's called the RT6. This vehicle in all cost 200,000 RMB, which is at today's rate 27,000 US dollars. It's a 60% reduction from the previous version. And it's designed for all the L4 capability. It operates without a driver. It has detachable steering wheel. It has 8 LiDARs, many cameras, and very powerful onboard computing. It supports easy battery swap as well. So this vehicle is being rolled out right now. And Baidu, their robotaxi operates under the name called Apollo Go. They are already in about a dozen cities in China, and very easy and convenient to use. Baidu is on the way to deploy 1,000 RT6 vehicle in Wuhan by the end of the year, which it believes it could reach a break-even point for operating profit. In terms of increasing scale and reducing cost, China clearly is leading the way. A few interesting numbers are very critical to its path for profitability. So in comparison, Waymo's current robotaxi, the Jaguar, cost more than $100,000. Tesla boasted its Cybercab to be less than 30,000, but it's probably another couple of years away. Waymo reached out to Chinese automaker Zeekr for its next generation AV for lower cost. But with the potential rising tariff, this plan most likely will be scrapped. But Baidu is already making the RT6 at 27,000, amortized then in 7 years. And with its operation network scaling up and the autonomous driving technology continue to improve, it's estimated that its operating cost has also dropped by 30%, and its service variable cost dropped by probably 80%. For example, even no driver is needed in the car anymore. It's still required for remote safety operators. You see the picture, it's like a gaming room. Originally at 1-to-1 ratio, and now it's operating at 1-to-3 or to 1-to-5, depending on the city's requirement. And in the future, technology improvement could, and also in combination of safety regulation allows, it could easily go to 1-to-10, or even 1 to a significant number. That's the biggest driver for robotaxi, still when the human cost is involved. And furthermore, the success of the Apollo Go platform and also this RT6 price point could allow it to enter the personal vehicle market to compete with the Tesla and the GM. And of course, Baidu is also considering licensing its technology from ADAS, such as its vision-only city pilot, to the higher level autonomous driving, to automaker or to robotaxi operations. And it has a joint venture with Geely called the Jiyue. It's already using a full range of its autonomous driving software. So it seems after years of investment, Baidu's commitment in autonomous technology is paying off, and it's also changing our urban mobility. So to conclude, let's discuss the contrasting paths forward for China and the US auto industry. China clearly has become a powerhouse with some unique opportunities, but also more challenges. China has a rapid expansion in electrical vehicles, no doubt, driven by substantial government incentives. And the domestic brands are gaining also significant market share, and the competition is intensifying as many vehicles just work hard just to stay alive. However, the force behind is also causing serious overcapacity. The stress along the supply chain, massive financial risks, and the unpredictable regulations that companies must have to navigate. So what's the best path forward? So first, it has no other choices but to go global. And with also very strong state support, the Chinese automakers are doing so at the moment. Second, industry consolidation will be necessary. We may see more mergers and acquisitions to streamline production and just reduce capacity. Even though the state-owned automakers, the First Auto, the Chang'an, and also the local provincially interested groups, and as well as so many new private players, they all try their best to stay on top. So I don't think it's going to be any orderly process for this consolidation. And lastly, a balanced government strategy will be very crucial, especially in China. You need the government, but you cannot rely on it. And then coming to US, on the other hand, it still grapples with high inflation and the slower EV transition. It's really hard to change the inertia and catch up. So probably it's good to start defensively. That means tariffs and incentive for local companies. And then in the middle ground is whether to consider encourage Chinese brands to establish local manufacturing plants. This may protect the US jobs, but may not be good news for US companies. And ultimately, US need a focus to be focused on strategic adaptations, meaning need to invest in technology and encourage innovation in EV, in autonomous drivings, in software-defined vehicles. And the US also need to dramatically improve efficiency and shed cost. So the few years in COVID and all the momentum is not helping. So US needs to prepare for this intensified competition. Sooner or later is coming from the Chinese automakers. And also just like what the Japanese and Korean and including China's 10 years ago did to overcome the gaps versus the global benchmark. Probably smart to consider cooperating and leverage with the Chinese supply chain and learn from the advanced technologies. So some European companies are already doing so, but it will take some dramatic steps, especially the mentality shift to be successful. So this concludes my sharing. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Yoon. Very good insight into the AV industry in particular, AI industry as well, especially with a Chinese perspective. Let me get myself involved here. There we go. Got some good questions for you here. When you compare what the Chinese are doing on AVs, how does that compare to what Waymo and Cruise are doing? Are there differences? I know that in the past we've had Pony AI speak at our conference.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that they also have a play in China as well.
Yes.
But technologically speaking, are they doing anything differently than what Waymo and Cruise are doing?
Yeah, I think this is a good insights. Clearly, Tesla on the passenger vehicles and the Waymo on the autonomous driving L4 and L5. I think they are leading the way globally. What the Chinese are doing is they recognize the direction and they learn very fast, and then they push to the boundary above and beyond. So on the methodology, on the technology trend, the Chinese are following basically the way Tesla and the Waymo has already explored to be successfully. But first of all, they are faster. There is much bigger scale. There are many companies. Probably you can count a dozen companies in both the ADAS field for L2 plus to the autonomous driving from the Waymo, the Wenyuan, who just went public in US, and Pony is on the way, but Baidu is even a much bigger with its large scale operation doing that. So they are just They're doing similarly, but more and further and deeper. But it's the big gap compared to, I think the gap we're seeing more is compared to from Detroit to China. While China, clearly there are many loyal disciples following Tesla and the Waymo in California. But now, because there are so many of them, they all find their way to differentiate, to push it further. You are seeing they are even getting ahead.
So did I hear you say that the pricing for autonomous vehicles in China may be such that consumers may purchase them?
Yes, well, I think that's also another difference. For good or bad, the Chinese players' approach is a little for the long run. That means they are willing to sacrifice short-term profitabilities to develop the products, to attract the users, and to try out the business models. That's why you don't see them struggle so much about making a real clear business case. But the technology clearly is being developed. The product is pushed on the road, and it's getting feedback. It's revolution. It's being very fast. So yes, well, it's also part of the issue of the market, right? Clearly, companies are complaining, especially those autonomous driving companies. They are developing such an amazing technology, and often at a very minimum, R&D cost, basically being reimbursed by the car makers. However, they are willing to do that. It's across the board in this market.
Now, we've seen what happens in the U.S. In certain circumstances with AVs, and things not working out as well as they would like, especially for those edge cases. And I think you gave an example of adjusting quickly to those kinds of cases. Now, in the U.S., Tesla's having some heartburn about the autopilot program. The National Highway Transportation Safety Administration has opened up some investigations into problems that they've had with autopilot. Has China seen those issues as well? And if so, how has the government responded?
Yeah, I think that's also significant difference between U.S. and China. I mentioned the Baidu's success will be made so much more because it's operating in a more tolerable market. If you are almost have never heard about the AEB recall from a Chinese automaker in China. So that's part of the China market mentality and the government support behind it. So the government clearly recognized the EV, the autonomous driving, the Chinese, not only 10 years ago, they were following from the German big tier ones, learn from the Silicon Valleys, but now they are enjoying some success. I think they are seeing it as a path to lead the way. That's why there's less discussion. Of course, safety will be reinforced more and more, but you are seeing the Chinese market is simply much more tolerable to support this kind of new technology, new paradigm in business, different business models.
Including if people die?
Well, yeah, that's one Tesla is illustrating the numbers of it depends on what scale you are looking at, right? If the use of autopilot on average is reducing the fatality or the accident rate by a certain percentage.
Yeah.
Well, there is I think it's part of a different mentality, how you consider when the new technology rolling.
Yeah, I know that it usually makes a difference whether the regulators pick up on something. If people start dying, then it starts raising up the level of investigations.
Right.
Got a couple questions for you from our online attendees. Does Huawei already produce cars under its own brand or under another brand?
Yeah, Huawei is doing everything except it's basically selling under the Huawei brand.
Mm.
So at this moment, I think it's officially cooperating with four big automotive brands. So they, though, for example, Series, they have the Ito brand with Huawei. It has been selling among the top with Li, and they also have it with Cherry, with Bike. So those are one of their models. So literally, Huawei is, people are buying those brands because they recognize Huawei, they consider it as a Huawei brand, even though officially it's not a Huawei brand. And of course, Huawei has two other business models. They also supply some key components or the autonomous driving systems to other automakers. There has been this famous, when the chairman of SAIC years ago came out saying, "Oh, he will never cooperate with Huawei because he considered then he sell the soul of the automaker to an outside company." But it clearly backlashed because whoever care less about having Huawei fully control the vehicle enjoyed success. And then now we are seeing potentially more and more brands are following suit.
Okay, thank you. Another question. This is a uniquely Chinese question. I don't know if it has any truth as to it. One of the attendees says, "I've heard stories about EV graveyards in China that are located outside the major cities where the EVs that just quit working. Does there any truth to that?"
Well, yeah, this is something I don't know. I cannot speak for truth, but I don't know. I can make some hypothesis, right? I mean, earlier, I think one of the speaker also mentioned earlier. I think EV from 10 years ago, there was government incentives. There were some schemes to develop not so great products for the subsidy. So it happened. However, if you look at the cars, the Neo, the Xiaopeng, even the newly created brands, Xiaomi is building their first vehicle just the last 2-3 years, right? Fresh, their first vehicle. Those has been great products, right? I mean, the Ford CEO mentioned he brought a Xiaomi to Chicago. He has been driven it for 6 months and he loved it. But consider Xiaomi has never touched the car 3 years ago, and that's the brand new first vehicle they're building. So the new EVs are great products. But there could be some legacy issues from the past, or there could be some of the losers in the EV market. Consider there are so many different brands, right? I mean, some of them may not work as well. I probably can imagine. Yeah.
Now, last question for you. One of the things that we've talked about has to do with the differentiators between Chinese vehicles and foreign makes. And you mentioned a number of these in your presentation. Urban NOA, high-speed electric drive, L3 AVs, and in particular, the cross-domain SoC integration. When you look at those four in particular, which one of those do you think are kind of like missing within the U.S. perspective? You know, something that you think would be a real good marketing thing if the U.S. companies actually did it here in America.
Well, I think different from China, U.S. has been much more economic driven industry, U.S. automotive. It has also been much specialized over the last decades, right? It used to be Delphi, Visteon are the leading tier ones in many of the electronics chassis products. But we are seeing last couple of decades, the Germans are clearly leading the way. The Bosch, the Conti, the ZF. But what China is doing is it's learning from both. That's why I made the points. You are seeing the Chinese are developing the full range, from manufacturing to software to hardware. Some of them are led by the German tier ones. Some of them are led by the American automakers. And the US has just, I haven't seen too much of, systematically try to lead across the board of the automotive industry. That's just my own perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of the things that, you know, we hear about the innovation that's going on in China. There's a lot of in cockpit innovation, in vehicle experience, and so it makes me wonder what is going on inside the cockpit, inside the in-vehicle experience that would actually transfer to U.S. consumers.
You know, interestingly, the cockpit is powered by Qualcomm, and the Chinese are the first and the fastest to apply almost the last 3 generations of the Qualcomm chip, the Snapdragons. So I think 3 years ago we're already seeing the newest, the greatest SoCs are being piloted, launched in China first. Now, just consider the cross domain, given it's a cockpit plus ADAS or the chassis. It's clearly where the industry is going. But just think about the massive amount of software that's needed in it. That's when the legacy companies, no matter tier ones or the automakers, Americans and Germans, they massively struggle. But we are seeing, clearly Tesla paved the way, and the Chinese are a good disciples. They are learning fast. They can also do it, but the legacy companies really struggle.
Yeah, very good. Yun, thank you very much for your presentation and your insights. We really appreciate it. Will you be able to stay online for
I will do.
Kyle?
Yeah.
Great. All right, let's see if we can bring Kyle online. Hi, Kyle.
Hi, Bruce. So
All right, let me do an intro for you.
Okay.
All right, Kyle Sullivan is Vice President of Business Advisory Services at the U.S.-China Business Council based in Washington, D.C., where he oversees U.S. CBC's research and analysis for member companies. Prior to joining this group, Kyle served as Vice President of Albright Stonebridge Group's China practice in Washington. Early in his career, Kyle worked as a manager of business advisory services at USCBC's Shanghai office, where he led policy research projects for U.S. companies in a wide range of sectors. Kyle earned his undergraduate degree from the University of Michigan and an MBA from University of Washington in Seattle. He's fluent in Mandarin and has lived in China for over 12 years. Welcome, Kyle.
Before I begin, I just want to quickly introduce my employer, the U.S.-China Business Council. For audience members who are not familiar, we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan trade association. We represent about 270 American companies that do business with China. Most of our members are nearly, well, all of them are U.S. headquartered multinational corporations. We represent companies from most sectors of the economy. The two U.S. OEMs are within our membership. We have tier one suppliers, tertiary suppliers to the auto sector, in addition to other primary sectors of the economy: healthcare, financial services, manufacturing, etc. So what I'm going to do today is just talk a little bit about an update to the U.S.-China trade policy landscape. There's been quite a few policy and regulatory requirements proposed at the national level in the U.S. and in China that I think will affect cross-border trade in the auto sector. And then secondly, I'm going to present findings from our 2024 annual member survey that was published in September. And then I'll wrap up with just some brief thoughts on where I think the U.S.-China relationship will go in the short term following the election outcomes here in the United States. And then we can reserve time for Q&A. So as I said, I'll go as quickly as I can so we can do Q&A. So just briefly on the policy landscape, I just want to spend a few minutes to update the audience here. There's quite a few new rules that are pertinent to the auto sector, proposed rules, and also final rules from the U.S. In particular. And in the waning days of the Biden administration, the executive branch has been very active in proposing regulations targeting specific investment activities, technology, and other commercial cross-border commercial activities between the two countries. Those rules or proposed rules include the outbound investment screening. So that's kind of the reverse CFIUS, right? Second one is the proposed rules on cross-border data transfer. Third one, military end user rules. These are export controls that would apply to 4 different types of end user in China. And then I think lastly, most relevant to the automotive sector is the Department of Commerce's proposed rule on information and communications technology and services in the connected vehicle space. So that's the ICTS rules here in red. Those are sweeping new regulations. They haven't been finalized yet. But I think, for the purposes of this discussion, I can just give a little bit of background. I'm not sure if your previous presenters have talked about it. It's important. So in late September, the Department of Commerce's Bureau of Industry and Security, which is the export control regulator here in the U.S., they proposed rules on screening. The securing the information and communications technology and services supply chain. And these rules, if implemented, would essentially be an import ban on connected vehicle software coming from China, and essentially would even prohibit the importation of potentially prohibit the importation of products that are going back and forth between U.S. headquarters and U.S. subsidiaries in China. So if you are a U.S. supplier and you are sourcing software or even any covered technology that relates to connected vehicles, so that could be autonomous driving technology, even remote entry to vehicles. So if a U.S. importer or U.S. OEM or supplier is sourcing those technologies from China, they will have to first obtain a license from the Bureau of Industry and Security, and secondly would have to, if they don't obtain a license, then they would have to make a declaration of conformity with the customs here in the U.S., proving that their technologies do not have any China-sourced components in it. So we think it's going to be a major compliance issue. The BIS is traditionally the export control regulator. This is kind of the reverse. This would be an import control. And so, I think that the implications for supply chains could be rather profound, especially insofar as firms would be required to really trace the origins of their technologies, and even if it's a fourth, fifth tier removed from them, they still have to document where their technologies are coming from, and so it just would be a very costly compliance endeavor for firms. Let me go on just quickly to the I can answer questions specifically on this rule. Let's go on to the Chinese side. So in the face of all these recent restrictions and policy overtures toward China from the U.S., the Chinese government in recent years has updated its own regulatory system to accomplish a few things. A, to protect its own industry. B, to from a foreign policy, geopolitical perspective, to perhaps raise the costs of the U.S. instituting their own restrictions on China. A lot of these new regulations, for example, the unreliable entity list, that is a blacklist on trade and commerce in China. If you are a foreign firm and you end up on the unreliable entity list, it will be a major disaster for you. And so a lot of these tools are kind of retaliatory in nature, and to protect China's own national and economic security interests. I think most recently a new rule that caught our attention is the dual use export controls regulations. So China has, similar to the US, it has a list of products that are controlled for export. And if you are exporting a controlled product, you need to apply for a license. In China, they have about 700 controlled items. The US has about 2,400. Many of these are dual use, right? Civilian and military applications. The Chinese side is endeavoring to expand that list of controlled items. We actually met with China's export control regulator a couple months ago when they were in DC, and they told us point blank, hey, we are learning from the US. We are watching what the BIS in America is doing with respect to export controls, and we are essentially kind of mirroring their system, and we are going to expand the list of controlled items. And that's what's happening here, I think, with these dual use export control regulations. These are proposed rules. They go into effect, actually, I believe in December. There's a lot of unanswered questions. For example, there's an extraterritoriality component to it, similar to the U.S. foreign direct product rule, that would have major implications for American firms that are sourcing from China and exporting to the U.S. And the concern, I think, from a company standpoint, also from just, I guess, the U.S. government standpoint, is to what extent is China prepared to weaponize its own restrictions to achieve its geopolitical objectives. And that's casting a pretty large shadow of uncertainty over in the business environment in China. The Chinese government so far has, I think, exercised a considerable degree of restraint, applying these tools in a very ad hoc fashion, maybe conducting investigations at the outset, but not necessarily deploying the full power of these tools so far. So that's just kind of an update in the landscape there. Let me talk a little bit about our member survey, some proprietary data in here. As I mentioned, we have about 280 member companies. Our survey this year, we had about half of those companies participate, so a little over 140 firms had participated. We do this every year. It's kind of our flagship report. We ask about the company's challenges, their financial performance, and their future planning for the China market. And in this year, the survey is quite interesting. I think, consistent with previous years, U.S.-China relations is a top challenge. The number 2 challenge was China's macroeconomy. There's considerable concern about the economic policy, economic trajectory in China, as previous speakers have mentioned. And then number 3, competition with Chinese companies. Clearly a recurring theme in today's conference. We have some data on that in the survey and subsequent slides. Following that, export controls, Chinese data policies, tariffs and things like that. So a lot of these issues are pretty familiar, at least for large U.S. firms operating in China. No major surprises here. But to me, that kind of shows, at least from a trade advocacy, trade association's perspective, we're not really seeing a lot of positive momentum, in terms of addressing these recurring issues that American firms encounter in China. So one thing that did catch our eye this year, the macroeconomic environment and insufficient demand in China really is acting as a constraint against profitability. Typically when you do the survey, we ask companies, what is the number one constraint against profitability? In previous years, it's been Chinese regulations, or U.S. regulations, competition with Chinese companies. This year, it's just the overall depressed economic environment, specifically insufficient demand or overcapacity in industry. And we're seeing overcapacity rear its head in some traditional sectors, but as well as new sectors. Obviously, throughout the automotive supply chain, plastics, some types of consumer goods. And I think about a third of our members said that they have already seen overcapacity in their industry, or they expect to in the near future. And that's quite problematic, I think, for U.S. firms. A lot of our companies, a similar proportion, about 1/3, they've seen price declines in their sector in the past year. And historically, American companies have been able to charge a premium in China. That has been their competitive advantage over domestic companies, historically speaking. But that kind of advantage is shifting a little bit, and that potentially has profound implications for companies long term in China. Going back to these U.S.-China relations. So you have all these tensions at the bilateral government-to-government level, all these new restrictions from both sides, rhetorical statements regarding strategic competition. The U.S. government's position is that China is a geopolitical rival, and all of their policy activities are oriented around that organizing principle, and that's really creating a lot of tangible challenges for companies doing business in China. And you can see in this chart here, it's about 45% of our members have said they've lost sales due to Chinese customers. They've lost sales due to customer uncertainty of continued supply. So what that means is, if an American firm has a Chinese customer, and that Chinese customer is put on the entity list, for example, that business relationship is severed, right? The second example is perhaps a Chinese customer is concerned about being placed on the U.S. entity list, or they're concerned about being blacklisted in some way. Some are taking preparations and finding alternative suppliers to source from, so that they are not subject to future disruptions in product flow. And so that's really having a major impact for our companies here. 45% said they've lost sales due to that type of behavior. Suppliers, there's some shifts in suppliers. I got a slide here. There's lots of discussion about supply chain, reconfiguring supply chains in the face of this kind of strategic rivalry between the two countries. But honestly, in the data, we're not really seeing that show up in a very pronounced way. I mean, there's sure a minority of firms have restructured their supply chains, kind of on the margins, right? Perhaps doing an in China for China supply chain, that is nothing new. But you're not really seeing companies drastically restructure their supply chains outside China because of these bilateral concerns. And that, to me, I think is a reflection of, again, the kind of commitment that our member companies have to the China market. They're there for the long term. They're there to serve the domestic market. Most of them are not there for purely export purposes. And so they've already done their job for the most part in localizing certain segments of the supply chain where possible. Here's a data point that really caught our attention, and it's quite alarming. So we asked our members, to what extent are you seeing changes in market share in the past year? And this year, you can see in the yellow there, it's over a third, 34% had indicated they've lost market share in China in the past year. That speaks to the hyper-competitive market that many of the presenters have eloquently described in previous presentations. And I think a lot of this has to do with just the innovation curve. Chinese companies are becoming increasingly innovative. Their domestic capabilities are becoming world-class, particularly in the automotive sector, and also just in kind of the new energy sector generally. And China has a lot of policy support for its domestic firms, as Yun had described, through incentives, through subsidies, and other types of preferential treatment. And so market share for U.S. companies, lost market share for U.S. companies in China is coinciding with a rise in China's use of industrial policies to promote domestic sectors. And they're having, here we have asked our members, so what are some of the negative impacts from industrial policies in China? And nearly, a vast majority of them, 79%, said that Chinese industrial policies are increasing the competitiveness of Chinese companies. And secondly, 55% said that industrial policies which favor domestic firms are resulting in domestic companies shifting away from American products and services. And that really has to do with China's domestic substitution drive, particularly focusing on at least three to four sectors. That's new energy, ICT, so semiconductors and related IT products, healthcare, particularly medical devices, and automotive and batteries. We asked our companies, to what extent are you seeing your private Chinese competitors receive benefits that are not available to American companies? And it's, I think, a record high this year. Said 78% said that they suspect their private Chinese competitors are receiving kind of these asymmetric policy incentives that are otherwise not available to them, the American firm. Just quickly on the financials. So, despite all these headwinds, the slower market environment, the increasing uncertainty at the political level, and the rising competition, the vast majority of American companies that are within our membership, and you can go on our website, see our members, most large iconic brands, 80% of them reported a profit in China last year. So clearly, U.S. companies are still performing well financially in China, perhaps not to the degree they were performing 5 years ago. In 2020, where 91% were profitable. In 2019, 97% were profitable. So you're seeing kind of sequential declines in the number of firms that are reporting a profit in China. But whether this is a long-term decline or a 1 or 2 year aberration, it's hard to say. I think probably I suspect that it's generally more difficult to churn a profit in China. It's more expensive to churn a profit in China, right? Because of the fierce level of competition which pushes up the cost of goods sold for firms. So we'll see how the data pans out in subsequent years, but just overall, it points a picture of a tougher environment for sure. So there's been lots of discussion about, well, okay, to what extent are U.S. companies scaling down? Are they pulling out of China? Are they investing in China? And I think the kind of narrative in media is that there's lots of question marks around that. But you can see here from our survey, it's 80% of our members said that they plan to reinvest their profits this year. And most of these investment activities relate to reinvesting onshore profits that have been generated in China over the years. Many big companies are sitting on large amounts of cash, and they're finding ways to plow that cash back into their operations. One thing that we're not seeing is new capital injections from headquarters going into China. There's FDI, inbound FDI from the United States into China certainly is kind of leveling off or decreasing. But I think it's a function of the demography of the types of American firms that are operating in China now. There's I think probably a bias towards larger firms. Larger firms are still there. Larger firms are still innovating and still selling and still making a profit. Whereas perhaps some of the U.S. small, medium-sized enterprises, maybe they've moved out or they've scaled down operations. So these big firms have, over the years, have generated billions of dollars in profits in China, and they're sitting on this cash and they're finding ways to reinvest. And I think the last point I'll make about that is, they're investing in ways that they're not making a big splash. A lot of the companies are putting money into innovation centers, kind of these MPV negative projects, or perhaps not building new factories, but doing new design centers. I think Ford built a design center 2 years ago. GM upgraded its design center in Shanghai, I think last year. And so a lot of companies are doing those types of investments where it enables them to get closer to their customers and enables customers to see their products, to demonstrate their products. So a lot of companies are kind of perhaps in a wait and see mode before they make further big investments. And right now they're just kind of servicing existing investments, if that makes sense. Similarly here, we ask companies, to what extent do you plan to relocate your operations in China, outside China? It's about a fifth. 19% said that they have plans or they've already moved certain segments of their footprint out of China. And it's not an insignificant number. It's certainly higher than in previous years, down 2 basis points from 2023. That's kind of immaterial. But, I think for the most part, again, it's the companies are there for the long term. And, one reason why, I think the major reason why they're there is, again, to serve the China market. And I don't necessarily need to go into detail what that means, but another reason many of our members are in China, that it's really to participate in one of the most innovative markets globally. And I've heard several automotive observers and automotive industry insiders compare China to a fitness center, right? They are in China to work out, to get strong, get buff, and to prepare themselves for the competition, the real competition, which is on the global stage. And as Chinese companies continue to enter third markets outside China, American firms are going to be running into them in third markets, and being in China, having a close watchful eye on what your domestic competitors are doing is now kind of a major feature of our members' global strategies. And in fact, we asked, to what extent is China important to your company's global competitiveness? And 91% said it's important. If you add that up, it's about 23% said they would not be competitive globally without China, whereas 50% said China is a key element of their global operations. So that's a message we try to take to U.S. lawmakers in particular. We get lots of questions about, okay, why are your member companies investing in China? They're a geopolitical rival. Well, here's a very easy to understand reason. It's because they need to be in China to to be competitive globally. And that's, like I said, kind of a major, something that we're trying to convey to the U.S. So I'll just wrap up here lastly on the trajectory of the U.S.-China relationship. Now that President-elect Trump will be assuming office in about 2 months, I'm not going to crystal ball and make big predictions or anything like that. I'm not really in the business of forecasting. But I think if we look at some of the style of President-elect Trump and the priorities that his first administration had set forth vis-a-vis China, we could perhaps draw some inferences regarding what the China policy could look like. And to me, the two biggest questions are, how far will the U.S. go on tariffs? And the second question is, to what extent will the U.S. their China policy strategy, to what extent will they continue with what is called the Sullivan Doctrine? It's not my doctrine. It's Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor. He's the one who's really been championing the kind of small yard, high fence paradigm in Washington. And so, what I'm asking myself and what I will be observing is, will the Trump administration maintain that overall posture towards China? And will that posture continue to inform policy actions again vis-a-vis China, or will they broaden out that small yard, high fence? Will the yard get wider? Will the fence get higher? And at this juncture, it's I guess it's difficult to say, but the trend is moving toward that direction, even under the Biden administration, with those restrictions that I mentioned at the outset of my presentation. Just quickly on tariffs. Obviously, President-elect Trump is a major advocate for levying tariffs, or perhaps threatening the use of tariffs against trading partners. And from a process standpoint, one thing that we are watching for is, how will the U.S. levy tariffs against China? Will it be through revoking China's permanent normal trade relation status, PNTR, or will they legislate some new legislation, or will they levy go back to Section 301 or Section 232 tariffs against China? So, one contrast with the Biden administration, obviously they left in place the Trump era tariffs. They even had imposed their own tariffs last May against the EV sector and a few others. But largely speaking, the tariffs under the Biden administration have been narrowly scoped, targeted to specific industries, largely to protect nascent domestic industries here, like EVs. Whereas the Trump era tariffs were very broad-based. It affected thousands of tariff lines. They were not strategically crafted. It was really to gain negotiating leverage with China. And I suspect that the Trump second term, their approach will be something similar to what they had done in the first term, where it's possible that the President Trump-elect will want to make some sort of arrangement or negotiation with their Chinese counterparts, and in order to facilitate that arrangement, it is possible that they will levy tariffs or threaten the use of tariffs in order to extract concessions from the Chinese side. So that's all I'll say. I don't really have any additional insight. It's very early days right now. And I think I'll wrap up here and happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kyle. What time do you got to go?
I need to go in 10 minutes.
Okay. What are you hearing in China in the past week since the U.S. election? Can you describe what this incoming administration means for the auto industry?
Yeah, so I think just perhaps I can touch on the perhaps how China is preparing for a second Trump administration. I think there was an expectation, I would say, that the president-elect would win, I think. And in recent weeks, I think on November 8th, the the Chinese government had announced some new economic policies aimed at stabilizing the economy. And they had, my understanding is that back in September, the government in China started to kind of recognize that something needed to be done on the economy, but they did not want to take action until after the U.S. election, because the outcome of the U.S. election would influence the kind of the global macroeconomic environment and the trade policy environment for China. And so 2 or 3 days after the U.S. election, the National People's Congress had announced a large kind of debt relief program for the local governments. And that program is really to kind of clean up bad debt and enable local governments over the medium term to issue additional stimulus to prop up the economy. So, that's a bit speculative, but I do think there's some truth to that the Chinese side was closely observing the election and making decisions around timing to announce new policies. The second point I'll make is, it's early days. They're I think right now endeavoring to understand, like everyone else, what a second Trump administration will look like. I think if the second Trump administration is more closely aligned with the first 2 years of the first Trump administration, so 2017 to 2019, then I think the Chinese side can more easily manage that. At that time, during the phase one trade agreement and the preceding tariffs, President Trump was, I think, quite transactional at that time. But if a second Trump presidency is more closely aligned with the second half of his first term, whereby the administration was drastically increasing their rhetorical statements and overtures against China. There were some, I think, pretty dramatic statements from the State Department and from President Trump himself about China. And obviously with the onset of the pandemic, which hurt him politically, he began to blame China for that. And if the president takes that type of rhetorical posture from the outset, starting next year, then it'll be much, much more difficult for the Chinese.
Yeah, one of the things that one of your colleagues spoke about was that in the past, he said that because of the intertwining of business between the U.S. and China, it would keep us from entering into a quote Cold War mentality that we had with Soviet Union before the wall came down. Do you still see that as a mitigating factor or a way of supporting the relationship?
Just avoiding a Cold War as a mitigating factor?
The having intertwined businesses.
Got it.
That would keep, we didn't have that with the Soviet Union. We didn't have any kind of business that needed to be connected. Can that be used as a balance to help keep a Cold War from happening?
So that's a great question. I think I tend to look at the U.S.-China relationship a bit differently, and I don't necessarily apply the Cold War metaphor to the dynamics between the two governments right now. And that's really because of as you mentioned, the two governments are really the two countries. There's a lot of parity or close to parity from an economic standpoint. China is the second largest economy in the world. From a military standpoint, I think most security observers in the U.S. they characterize China as a near peer rival. So I think entering into a Cold War would have probably even more profound and devastating consequences vis-a-vis the actual Cold War between the US and Russia. But your question about does business serve as a ballast, clearly that's our hope. But there's an overriding national security objective in the US now to outcompete China in various realms. And I'm not speaking for myself. I'm just summarizing and characterizing the sentiment in Washington, D.C. And that overriding national security prerogative, I think, is very difficult to walk back, and indeed it will continue to inform policy decisions vis-a-vis China, and sanctions and tariffs and all these other types of tools. So I think a continued trajectory, downward trajectory. Things will probably continue to get worse in the near term. And from the Chinese perspective, they have their own options, right? If, for example, if the U.S. were to levy significant tariffs against Chinese imports, the Chinese side, theoretically and plausibly would probably raise their own reciprocal tariffs, probably remove or reduce tariff exemptions, and could do other things like devalue their renminbi. In fact, the People's Bank of China a couple of days ago had devalued it a little bit, and that was probably, the geopolitical strategists would probably say that was a response to the Trump victory. And they also have other tools, decreasing U.S. agricultural exports. So there's just going to be a lot more of that in the near term, and certainly will put pressure on the business environment in China. And secondly, American firms that are trying to make progress on some of these policy barriers in China, it will be much more difficult for the Chinese government to be perceived as helping an American firm when the U.S. government is putting considerable pressure on China.
Yeah, very good. Last question. What do you think is good? What is the U.S.-China relationship going to look like 5 years from now?
Well, I think we will continue to be locked into a strategic competition that I think that will endure for the medium term. But with President-elect Trump, there could be opportunities for more, I would say, perhaps a different type of diplomatic dialogue. He tends to have a personal affection for President Xi, that perhaps could mitigate some of the more consequential policy decisions here. And so, that's my sliver of hope.
Very good. Okay. Very good. Kyle, thank you very much.
Thank you. Sorry I have to cut it short. Well, thanks so much.
Yeah, take care.
All right, bye-bye.
Okay, so that's it for today. We're one of the, again, as always, thank our affiliate companies for supporting us for our conferences and for our research. We're looking forward to our 2025 set of conferences that will begin on February 19th with software-defined vehicles, which was, as you can tell from Yoon's presentation, is going to be a big topic here in North America for a while. And so again, thank everyone both online and in person. Thanks to Kara Elkire, who's been manning the YouTube live stream, Sherry Eisenbeiser for the help with the conference here in Ann Arbor, and we'll see you next time. Take care.